Hello, guys. Tonight we travel to an era of fjords, freezing temperatures, and beards so unkempt that they could house their own livestock. Welcome to the Viking era, a world of creaking longhouses, air full of smoke, and constant suffering. Tonight you are not the fearsome raiders of Hollywood's legends. No, you are just another unfortunate soul born to a life of wet wool, superstition, and disappointment. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to give a like to the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, turn on a fan to create a soft background hum, and delve with me into tonight's journey. You will need all the comfort possible because your Viking life has only just begun. The day does not begin with the crowing of a rooster, but with your stomach reminding you that it has been almost 12 hours since your last meal, assuming you managed to swallow it. Viking cuisine is not exactly worthy of Michelin stars. You get up from a straw bed that smells of old sheep and stand in a one-room house full of snoring relatives, steaming livestock, and a smoke so thick you can chew it. Breakfast awaits. And by breakfast, we mean sour milk that is lumpier than liquid and rye bread from the day before, which in a pinch could serve as a weapon. You bite into something that crunches but shouldn't. Is it a pebble? A beetle? A tooth? It doesn't matter. You keep chewing. Food is food, and your options are limited. If it's summer, maybe there's fresh goat's cheese. If it's winter, you pray that barrel of dry, moldy herring doesn't kill you before the cold does. Historians still debate how often the Vikings ate meat, despite the popular belief that they lived on steaks and beer. The truth is that meat was a luxury, not a staple. Most meals are porridge, broth, or horrible fermented foods. Bark bread, yes, literally tree bark mixed with grain, is not just famine food. It is a seasonal delicacy when the grain runs out. Chew as if your life depended on it, because it does. There is also beer on the table, but don't get excited. It is weak, cloudy, and served warm in a wooden bucket. But it is safer than water, which often shares a source with your neighbor's latrine. Hydration is a lottery, so you sip the warm barley water and try not to think about what's floating in it. Then there are the unwanted guests. Parasites are part of the Viking food chain, specifically the part that lives in your intestines. Tapeworms, roundworms, liver flukes, you name it. They have colonized your intestines like small Nordic conquerors. You are not alone, and you're never clean. An archaeological study even found human coprolites. These are fossilized feces containing parasite eggs from fish, pigs, and humans, all in the same poop. It's a buffet inside you, whether you eat or not. Curiosities. Vikings used burnt animal bones as condiment. That's right. You sprinkled ash on your porridge because salt was scarce, expensive, and treasured like gold. If you wanted flavor, you better enjoy the essence of the previous day's fire. And breakfast was communal, by the way. You're sitting shoulder to shoulder with relatives who have not bathed in weeks, with their elbows submerged in a wooden pot. Everyone is trying to eat without being touched by the rat that occasionally dives in for a taste. Nobody talks much. Words are rationed like grain. And also, your mouth is busy controlling the damage of something that tastes suspiciously like boiled sock. But you eat it. Everything. Because you need strength to face a day of work in the field, cutting, transporting, fixing roofs, or perhaps preparing for a raid. Hunger is a faithful companion, and you have learned to ignore its pangs. You finish the meal with a hiccup of regret and a silent prayer to Thor so that he doesn't give you trouble. You may die in a swamp today, but at least you will not die from hunger. Probably. One might think that living in a frozen swamp full of furious gods and undercooked fish would entitle you to some luxury, such as a bath or a shirt that doesn't itch like betrayal. But no, hygiene in Viking society is more a folkloric concept than an everyday reality. You start your morning routine scratching yourself everywhere. The infested scalp, the armpits, waging a fungal civil war. The lower layers. Let's not talk about that. Lice are not only common, they are roommates. You even have a special comb for them carved from bone. And yes, everyone has one. In fact, archaeologists have found more Viking lice combs than real weapons, which says much. The Vikings bathed more often than their European neighbors, once a week if the water wasn't frozen. They called Saturday laundry day or larger. But don't imagine spa bathrobes and perfumed oils. It's more like sitting in warm swamp water while your cousin throws buckets of cold water on your back and makes fun of your body hair. You wash with ash soap, which is like rubbing sandpaper and disappointment on your skin. It doesn't help that your only towel is probably shared with 3 other people and smells like someone dried smoked fish on it. As for the bathroom, there is no space, of course, just a hole in the ground surrounded by planks. Maybe behind the long house, if you're lucky. If you don't have it, there is only forest. Toilet paper. How adorable. Try moss or snow. You choose the least painful option and hope that no curious goat looks you in the eye. Here comes the fun. Scholars still debate whether the Vikings used chamber pots indoors during the harsh winters or simply held on until their bladder negotiated with ice. In any case, indoor plumbing is a dream for another millennium. Let's talk about clothes. You put on a tunic of unprocessed wool, something between a horse blanket and an existential crisis. Underwear is not common, so you learn to keep warm with creative swaddling. Your leggings are hand-knitted, possibly uneven, and tied with laces that dig into your skin as soon as you bend over. There's a layer of skin to keep you warm, but it smells like the animal it comes from and constantly sheds, leaving remnants everywhere. And your shoes, 2 pieces of sewn leather, soaked and frozen in the morning. If your toes don't go numb by noon, it's a miracle. Historians still argue whether the Vikings stuffed their shoes with straw to keep warm or simply ignored the freezing as an experience that forged character. There are no mirrors in your house, only puddles and polished metal. So fixing yourself up is a matter of guesswork. Maybe you pluck your eyebrows or trim your beard if you have a free second. But mostly you hope to look less horrible than your brother, whose nose is permanently red from the cold and from mead. And yet, people say you smell less than other medieval cultures. Somehow, despite all this, you have a reputation for being cleaner than the average European. But that's like saying your hovel is burning less than your neighbor's. So you scratch, splash, and move on, leaving behind a trail of dead skin and regrets. And that, my friends, is the height of Viking hygiene. Dressing like a Viking is not so much a matter of fashion as of survival, and hardly that. You start the day wrapped in so much wool that you would make a sheep nervous, but somehow you still are cold. The wind goes through your tunic like gossip in a living room. You wrap yourself up more, although each additional garment is like adding another layer of sandpaper to your misery. Your main garment is a tunic woven by someone who did not quite master symmetry. One sleeve is tighter than the other, and the neck has been patched so many times that it now lies diagonally across the chest, like a badly drawn scarf. If you're lucky, it is dyed brown, which means it is dirty and we have given up cleaning it. The outer layer is attached to the shoulder with a brooch that you inherited from an uncle who probably died with his face sunk in a swamp. Technically, it is a symbol of status, although the brooch does not fasten well and the cape flutters violently in the wind like a broken sail. Some brooches are beautifully engraved. Others are simply pieces of bent metal that someone swore looked like a wolf. Historians still debate whether wool capes were common or an uncommon luxury. What is not discussed is the constant rubbing. You walk as if you have been riding a wooden horse uphill for 3 days, and all because your pants are sewn with goat wool that still has emotional charge. And the shoes? Normal Viking boots are 2 pieces of leather sewn with dry gut and blind optimism. No soles, no grip, no arch support. If you step on the mud, which you will, your foot becomes a portable swamp. Freezing is not so much a risk as a seasonal tradition. The belt holds everything: knife, bag, flint, and if you go out there for a while, some dried fish. Pockets do not exist, which means you're constantly checking yourself like a forgetful thief. And if you are rich, maybe you have metal rings sewn to your clothes, not for decoration, but to show that you did not die in a ditch last winter. Viking women do not have it easier. In fact, their outfits are even more complex. Multi-layered dresses with aprons fastened with oval brooches that also serve as makeshift toolkits. Everything is tied, knotted, or fastened with bone needles, which means that dressing is basically arming oneself. Oh, and forget about fashion statements. You're not going to make any. If your clothes are too pretty, people think you're trying too hard. If it is too tattered, they think you have already died once. The best you can hope for is that it is vaguely functional. Extravagant details. Vikings sometimes dyed their clothes with crushed insects or fermented urine to get the right tone. So yes, you are wearing what is basically a sweater made of bugs and pee. It smells as good as it sounds. But you go out anyway, with your head held high, your tunic billowing, your boots splashing, looking like someone who's just lost a fight with a bale of hay. Because in the Viking world, survival is not about looking good. It is about pretending you do not notice how much everything itches. By mid-morning, you are ready to commit violent acts. Not figuratively. You may have to kill someone today, and not even for a good reason. Because in Viking life, peace is just the awkward silence between two axe blows. You carry a weapon not because you are a soldier, but because everyone else does. Even the 12-year-old son of the blacksmith has a knife, and the goat herder has a club that has seen more action than the local chief. If you are a free man, you are expected to be armed at all times. If you're not, people assume that you are dead, that you're useless, or that you're plotting something, and not necessarily in that order. Your weapon is probably a hand axe, not one of those elegant double-bladed ones that appear on television, but a simple work axe that can split firewood or skulls, depending on your state of mind. It is patched, rusty, and has a name like Old Biter or Stick. If you're very rich or incredibly lucky, maybe you own a sword, but most people only see one in their entire life, and usually from the wrong side. Historians still argue about whether Viking violence was constant or seasonal. Some say the raids were infrequent and selective. Others claim bloody disputes were as common as birthdays. One thing is certain, discussions escalate quickly. A dispute over sheep can turn into a multi-generational bloodbath with legal proceedings, exile, and someone's house mysteriously burning down overnight. You head to the field with your axe, not only to cut firewood, but because your neighbor once accused your uncle of stealing a fishing net. That grudge still lingers. Everyone smiles, but no one forgets. That is the Viking version of community. There is no police, no sheriff, number 911. Justice is served cold, with iron or sometimes fire. The closest thing to law enforcement is the local authority, a public assembly in which disputes are shouted about among drunk farmers while someone holds a goose for reasons no one explains. And the raids. If your boss says it's time to set sail and terrorize the English coast, you go. You can't refuse. You are not recruited with an enlistment order, but by obligation, by peer pressure, and by the hope of stealing enough silver to fix your roof before it collapses again. A curious detail. The Vikings sometimes carried their own cattle on ships, tied in the corners to have meat on the hoof. Imagine that, crammed next to a bleeding sheep as you sail into battle, wondering which of the two will be devoured first. But even everyday violence is exhausting. Fights break out over land, water rights, or because someone looked too friendly at your wife during the harvest festival. You can't relax. You can't let your guard down because as soon as you do, you become the anecdote of someone who forgot their axe that day. So you always carry it with you, not because you want to fight, but because if you don't, you have already lost. If you think your family life offers you respite from the daily routine of public freezing and petty violence, I'm sorry. Being a Viking at home is like working on a sinking ship, but with more chores and louder livestock. Your long house is not a sanctuary. It's a crowded, smoke-filled barn disguised as a home. You share with your parents, siblings, grandparents, and, depending on your marital status, your new spouse and a mother who disapproves of everything. Oh, and at least a few goats. There is one room, one hearth, and zero privacy. You are never alone, except in your head. And even that is a shared space during winter. From childhood, you're expected to work. There are no charming coming-of-age stories. There are no sabbatical years. At 5 years old, you transport firewood. At 8, you clean the animal pens. At 12, you are fully trained in grinding grain, repairing tools, and existential fear. The school? That's adorable. Your education consists of what you can hear between arguments and animal grunts. Historians still argue about whether Viking children had time to play, or whether the concept is just a modern projection. But let's face it, if there was any free time, it was probably spent trying to stay warm or watching older brothers get hit for not warming up fast enough. The family structure is brutally practical. Marriages are arranged to strengthen alliances, not because you feel butterflies in your tunic. Love can grow over time, like moss on boots, but more often than not it is a tolerated coexistence with some teamwork during goat births. The spouse is not chosen, but negotiated. Dowries and bride price are haggled over as if they were livestock. She is strong, fertile, and only slightly cursed. Sold. And once you're married, you better like your in-laws. They are not leaving. The extended family is normal. You wake with your father-in-law snoring half a meter away, your small son stepping on your face, and someone's son screaming because a hen has pecked his finger again. You work together, eat together, fight together, and when the mead takes effect, cry together, but in silence. Emotional outbursts are reserved for funerals and fits of rage. Everything else, keep it in the depths of your soul, engraved with runes. Fun fact, Vikings sometimes resolve family disputes with poetry contests. That's right. Your father could have challenged your uncle to a battle of savage verses instead of a fight. Friendly insults, small and large. But, in general, life at home is exhausting. Your days are full of plowing, milking, repairing everything that breaks, which is everything, and teaching your children to survive in a world that tries to kill them with the weather, the wolves, and extremely questionable cheese. There is no time for you. You have to fix the roof. Stir the stew before it burns. Replace the thatched roof so it doesn't rain inside again. The closest thing to leisure is sitting near the fire while everyone screams because the goat has escaped again. So when people say that home is where the heart is, remember that in Viking life, it is also where the smoke and goats are, and where your patience runs out. The gods are always watching, judging, or both. In Viking society, you cannot have personal beliefs. You inherit them along with your grandmother's will cloak in your father's debts. Your spiritual life is not so much inner peace as how many animals we can sacrifice before the fjord floods again. Your day is woven with small rituals and great anxieties. You wake up, thank Thor if your cabin has not collapsed, and try to interpret if the strange raven flying in circles over your head means that you are doomed, blessed, or nature is simply mocking you. Spoiler, it's probably the third option. Viking religion is not a pleasant mythology. It is a terrifying chaos of capricious gods, cryptic prophecies, and the disturbing certainty that fate already hates you. Odin, the father of all, sacrificed an eye for wisdom, which sounds noble until you realize that he also sends ravens to spy on you and could curse your entire lineage for insulting his poetry. Historians still argue about whether the Nordic gods were worshipped out of fear or respect. Honestly, probably both. You pray to Thor because he protects farmers. You sacrifice to Freya to obtain a good harvest, but you never relax in her presence. You don't speak lightly of Loki unless you are prepared for a goat to spontaneously explode near you. And the sacrifices, oh my God. A good ritual may include a chicken or goat if times are generous. A great ritual may include a horse. You cut its neck, collect the blood, and sprinkle on the walls, the statues, and yourself. The smell is unforgettable. It permeates. It haunts you. But you do it because if the gods are unhappy, they don't send plagues. They simply let your crops rot and your son break an ankle in the snow. The runes aren't helpful either. Sure, you can carve them in a bone or wood and ask them questions, but their answers are desperately vague. Careful on the path of many feet. What does that even mean? Geese, raiders, or a bad parade? Viking dreams are not private, either. If you wake screaming about a giant wolf or river of teeth, the whole family gathers to decide if it means death, pregnancy, or a leaky roof. Dreams are treated like divine emails. Badly formatted, but always urgent now. And if something goes really wrong, like your house burns or your goats disappear overnight, people don't ask what happened. They ask who has cursed you. A jealous neighbor, perhaps? A wandering seer? Maybe? That one-eyed old man who muttered something strange and walked into the forest backwards? Quite a peculiar detail. The Viking sorcerers, cedar workers, sometimes wear clothes of the opposite sex, and use staffs to weave fate itself. That's right, yes. Your local magic consultant could be a man in a dress waving a stick while everyone nervously pretends everything is fine. You live in a world where your next cold could be a curse, your dreams are omens, and every thunderclap could be Thor looking at you sideways. Faith is not comfort. It is a negotiation, though, one in which the gods have all the cards, and you're just trying not to be struck by lightning before dinner tonight. So you pray, whisper to the wind, kiss your amulets, and hope that the gods are not bored today, because bored gods are the most dangerous ones of all. Now we come to the part of your Viking life that really tests your commitment to suffering, a sea voyage. The moment someone shouts that the ships are ready, you pretend that you're excited. Everyone else shouts about glory and silver and makes the terrified monks wet themselves now. You mainly think about how easy it is to vomit now. Your boat is an engineering marvel, truly. If you're a 10th century naval carpenter, if you are a human being, it is a glorified wooden canoe with a dragon's head on the bow and absolutely no regard for your comfort. There are no seats here. You sit on a chest, yours if you are lucky, the sweaty remains of another if you're not so lucky. There is no shade, no roof, just 40 stinky men crammed together like smoked herring. You row for hours, sometimes for days straight. Sunburn on the left, frostbite on the right. You row in the rain, the fog, that kind of fog that whispers things like, maybe the gods have abandoned you now. And when the wind rises, you keep rowing because steering a long ship is like arguing with a very stubborn log now. Historians still argue whether most Vikings were full-time looters or just bored farmers with ships at hand. In any case, now you are here, in a hole that creaks in the middle of a rough sea, wondering if that last sip of sour beer was a tactical mistake now. The smell is biblical, really. Wet hair, seaweed, old meat, and men who have not bathed since last month's funeral. There are no bathroom breaks here. If you need to relieve yourself, lean over the side and hope the boat does not rock. One misstep, and you will be swimming with the eels. The only heat comes from your own body and the guy sitting too close by. And then there's the seasickness. You develop a relationship with it now. You give a name now. It becomes your companion now. You vomit. You cry silently under your reindeer cloak, and then you keep rowing onward. You sleep sitting, if you manage to sleep at all. The ocean rocks you like an angry cradle, and rats make holes in your provisions while you dream of solid ground that probably does not exist here. Sometimes the crew will sing. It is not cheerful. It is not even tuned. It is just a monotonous chant about dead heroes, giant wolves, and getting home before winter devours your children. But it keeps your hands moving. A curious detail. Some Vikings believed that sea monsters waited just below the surface, ready to drag down unfortunate ships. So if something hits the hull, like a log or a fish, you hold your breath and pray it is not Yender, the serpent of the world. And if it is, well, you hope to die fast. When you finally see land, you shout with joy until you realize that there's no port. You're going to strand the ship like a wounded whale and jump into the icy water that reaches your knees, dragging all your belongings through the rocks and, occasionally, some jellyfish. And this is the good part of the raid, because then comes the fight, the looting, and, if you're unlucky, getting shot in the eye with an English arrow forged by someone who thought that repelling Vikings should be a trade. But for now, you row. You row because if you stop, someone will shout at you, or worse still, sing another verse of that horrible dirge. So you lean forward. The salt splashes in your mouth, your spine hurts, and a seagull looks at you as if it knows you will not make it home. Welcome to the open sea. You want adventure. Instead, you have back pain and trench foot. You finally reach land, but do not get too excited. You're not here to sightsee. The boat crashes on a miserable beach, and in a matter of minutes, the chaos begins. Your job now? Kill strangers, steal their valuables, and, if possible, do not die in the mud while someone you do not know shouts at you in a language you do not understand. The story's painted gold. Thundering charges, clashing swords, blood splashing artistically against the sky. In reality, Viking battles are short, sloppy, and terrifying. You do not heroically kill anyone. Wield your axe. You pray that it hits something that bleeds. And you hope not to stumble along the way and that a teenager with a pointy stick does not stab you in the spleen. And you are not even one of the warriors of the first line. Unless you are some noble's favorite or have been blessed by the gods. You are the guy behind the guy with the sword. The bait, the distraction, the one who gets shot in the leg while another shouts about honor and throws a spear in the direction of the enemy. Historians still argue about how organized Viking raids were. Some claim that they used very compact shield formations and coordinated attacks. Others say it was more like everyone shouting and hoping for the best. Judging by your current experience, it is the second. You do not have any. Maybe a helmet if you are lucky. Not one of those fancy ones with horns. That is a myth. Real Viking helmets are plain iron. Sometimes they have a nose guard if you are rich, but in most cases you only have your scalp and a silent prayer. Your shield is round, made of wood, and already chipped around the edges from yesterday's training. It will not save you from anything pointy, but it makes you feel like you are trying. The worst thing is the shouting. Not only those of the enemy, but those of your own side. Battle cries, fear cries, moans of death, all mixed in a soup of existential horror. You lose the notion of who's friend and who's enemy. Someone stabs a monk, another slips in mud, and you are there panting, bleeding, realizing that you are still alive only because no one has pointed at you yet. Curiosities. The Vikings sometimes took poets to compose verses about their bravery in battle. You could be knee-deep in a stranger's cabbage patch, dodging arrows, while someone in the background hummed a rhyme about your heroic posture. Because nothing says epic conquest like haiku shouted over a barn in flames. And when everything is over, if you have not died, you loot. Not treasure chests, but church cups, cattle, maybe some sacks of grain. You burn what you cannot carry, spit on the altar, and return to the ship, dragging a sack that smells of old onions and guilt. But the price is steep. You have lost a friend, or maybe just someone you once borrowed rope from. He lies face down in the swamp with an arrow in the back and a look of surprise. There is no funeral, no honors, just a quick murmur to Odin and the silent decision to leave him where he fell. You have survived this time, but now you limp. You cough, and deep down, you begin to wonder if perhaps the raids are not as glamorous as they painted to you when you were 12 and listened to the war stories of Uncle Bjorn. Even so, you get back on the boat because the only thing worse than dying in a raid is returning home empty-handed. You return home not as a conquering hero, but as a disaster barely sewn together, full of bruises, calluses, and a slight emotional breakdown. But there is no time for reflection. Winter is coming, and, unlike the poetic version, this one is real, long, and wants to see you dead at all costs. You have brought some silver, a half-broken cup, and a very frightened sheep. Not bad, but not enough to buy warmth. Because in Viking Scandinavia, cold is not a season. It is a lifestyle. Your house is as wind-resistant as a wicker basket, and you can already feel how your fingers consider freezing as a permanent escape strategy. Your joints ache. Your nose is constantly dripping. Your skin cracks in places you didn't know could crack. There is no moisture left in the air, unless you count the thin layer of mucus and sweat inside your clothes. But you cannot rest. Winter is not a break. It is a slow-motion disaster. Your food reserves are always almost enough. You ration dried fish and porridge as if they were gold dust. You eat things that you wouldn't even give to a dog, and then you eat the dog. The parasites don't even die during winter. They just get slower and start biting you more slowly. And then there is leprosy or dysentery or maybe just a cough that ends in death. Historians still argue about which diseases were more frequent in Viking settlements. But one thing is clear. Diseases were not rare. They were part of family. You gave them names. You tucked them at night. Medical treatment is rudimentary at best. Do you have an infected wound from that English arrow? Do you burn it or apply moss to it? Or maybe you ask the village wise woman to recite a spell while she paints her chest with goose fat. Whether it works or not depends on your luck, your ancestors, and possibly your posture during the ritual. Fun fact, some Vikings believed that diseases were caused by angry spirits or elves shooting invisible arrows. The remedy? You guessed it. more spells, sometimes with iron scissors hung over a bed to confuse elves. So now you're coughing blood and sleeping under medieval wind chimes. There are also winter hands, a charming condition where fingers swell, crack, and sometimes freeze. You wrap them in wool, kiss your amulets, and keep cutting firewood because no one else is going to do it. And if you lose a toe or two, you keep walking. Literally, limping is just normal. To keep spirits up, people sing, carve runes, or tell stories by the fire, but they're not happy ones. They are stories about ice giants, sea monsters, and gods who betray you simply because they are bored. Comforting things. And of course, someone always dies. Someone dies. A cousin, baby, goat, whatever. Death in winter is not dramatic. It is quiet. A gasp, slump, long silence. No one has time to mourn properly because the roof is leaking again and the stew must be stirred. So you keep going, you keep eating if there is food, you keep praying if the gods listen to you. And above all, you endure because winter does not kill quickly. It wears you down flake by flake, sneeze by sneeze, until you are unsure if spring is real or just a feverish dream someone once carved in a bone. Let's take a moment to appreciate that no one had it easy in Viking life. But if you were a woman, it was not just hard. It was a carefully constructed nightmare with domestic duties, social expectations, and occasional witchcraft accusations just to keep things interesting. You were born with a job. Not a career, but a job. From the moment you could walk, you were taught to weave, cook, raise children, and maintain a house that lost heat faster than a cracked wineskin. You had no options, only tasks. If you are lucky, you are praised for embroidery. If you are very lucky, you do not die giving birth before 20. Women in Viking society had more rights than their European counterparts. Sure, they could own land, divorce husbands, and even wield a sword in exceptional cases. But those facts are often idealized. Historians still argue whether this independence was widespread or limited to a few lucky farm owners with good contacts and posture. For most, freedom was theoretical. Your marriage has nothing to do with romanticism. It is about alliances, properties, and how many cows you are worth. Love may come later or never. If your husband drinks too much mead and mistakes you for a sheep, you grit your teeth and move on. If he dies in a raid, congratulations. You are a widow, which may be the greatest autonomy you have ever had. Then there is childbirth. No hospitals, no anesthesia, just a couple more women, a carved rune for luck, and the willpower needed not to scream loud enough to wake all the ghosts of the fjord. Mortality rates are high. For every child born, there is a chance that the mother will not survive. If you survive, in a week you go back to work, because the goats do not milk themselves. And if you are smart, talk too much, know the herbs, or have dreams that accurately predict weather, be careful. That is how you end up being the subject of rumors as vulvar, seer, or even worse, which, fun fact, some women were respected for this role, as they performed magical rituals and divinations. Others were scapegoats. If the crops failed, if someone died mysteriously, guess who they started looking at suspiciously? The pressure to be perfect is relentless. Your house must be clean. Your children must be alive. Your husband fed. Your loom must never be idle. You are expected to be a seamstress, healer, food preserver, and moral compass. And if you fail in any of those things, the gods might not listen to your prayers, and your whole family could be cursed. So, no pressure. The worst thing is that when you finally have the age to relax with gray hair, crunchy knees, a whole life of sour milk and repressed rage behind you, your family can decide to abandon you on a mountain. Historians still debate the scope of elderly abandonment, but the stories persist. If you cannot contribute, some say you must return to nature. It is presented as a peaceful end. Sure, if you consider dying frozen while goats nibble your cape peaceful. So yes, the Viking men had it difficult. Diseases, raids, death by axe. But the Viking women died doing laundry, during childbirth, or by pure exhaustion. And they did it while being told that they were the lucky ones. At this point, you're probably thinking, surely the legal system offered some protection, right? Oh, sweet summer. The Viking law was not designed to protect. It was designed to entertain. The legal system looks less like a court drama and more like a local talent show mixed with vendetta bingo. Justice is not imparted by judges in robes. It is carried out in the thing, a public assembly where free men gather to resolve disputes, settle accounts, and occasionally exchange goats. You stand in a muddy field while the whole community watches you try to argue that your neighbor's cow entered your property first. And you better be convincing, because if your story does not hold up, you could end up exiled or dead. The rules are a mosaic of local customs, oral traditions, and what the boss decided last Tuesday after 4 horns of mead. Historians still discuss how much Viking law was applied consistently and how much was improvised. But one thing is clear. The loopholes were not errors. They were characteristics. If someone steals your axe, you can demand a ransom, literally a man price, an economic payment based on the value of the object and your social status. But what if they say that you stole first? Then it becomes a shouting match with legal consequences. And if you insult someone in public, especially if you insinuate cowardice or question their ancestry, prepare to fight. Not in a court, but physically. The trials could involve oaths, in which you and a group of friends swore that you were innocent and hoped that nobody blinked. Or there were trials by combat, in which the truth was determined by whoever first broke the other's skull. You could also be subjected to a test, such as carrying a red-hot iron bar to prove your innocence. If the burns healed well, the gods had spoken. If not, well, maybe you should not have angered the elves. Legal curiosities. You could be declared outlaw for things as insignificant as stepping on a noble's cape or throwing a fish at someone's wife during a banquet. Being outlaw meant that anyone could kill you on the spot, and they were encouraged to do it. You became a legal dead man, like a walking expired coupon. You lost your properties, your home. Your chances of surviving were worse than usual, which is saying a lot. And if you were the one who imposed justice, good luck. Imagine trying to collect a fine from a man with 3 axes and 0 remorse. Sometimes, the disputes became real wars. Families set fire to their enemies' barns for decades until someone ran out of sons. And remember, all this mess happens in public, with shouts and alcohol. The place was also a market, a dating spot, and a stage for performances. While you argue for your life, someone nearby is selling cheese, and another is composing a verse about how badly you are doing in the trial. Sure, the Viking law had its virtues. It encouraged negotiation, promoted local government, and sometimes avoided chaos. But for the most part, it was controlled chaos. Justice was not blind. It squinted at the sun, juggled knives, and hoped you didn't sneeze during your defense speech. So if you're accused of stealing a sheep, insulting someone's beard, or looking like a warlock, be prepared. Gather your oaths, polish your shield, and maybe write a good poem to win public sympathy. Because in Viking justice, the truth matters far less than the spectacle. By now, you will have realized that Viking life is an endless parade of discomfort and humidity. And your house, the place that is supposed to offer you rest, is nothing more than a wooden coffin with tasks to perform. Your long house is not cozy. It is a rectangle of despair, full of smoke where you live, sleep, eat, and slowly go crazy. There is no chimney. It's not an oversight. It is the design. The smoke from the central hearth curls upwards and stays there. If it gets too thick, it can escape through the thatched roof or the small hole above the fire, but only after spending an hour marinating your lungs. Everything smells of soot. Your cape, your soup, even your teeth. Your eyes cry constantly. You cough until you invent new sounds. The children stumble with the reddened gaze of little witches. Historians still argue whether exposure to indoor smoke shortened life expectancy, but everyone agrees that it probably put everyone in a bad mood. An asthmatic. The walls insulated with what is at hand: mud, moss, animal hair. Everything is vaguely warm and extremely flammable. The roof leaks at least 3 months a year, and the wind seeps through the cracks in the boards like an uninvited ghost. You wake up with your beard covered in frost, and you thank the gods that it isn't worse. The place where you sleep. There are no beds, just piles. You and your family huddle in sacks filled with straw, covered with skins that smell of humid mammoth. There are no separate rooms. If someone snores, everyone enjoys it. If someone dies during the night, well, they take care of that after breakfast. And breakfast is cooked on the same fire that you almost fall into during the night. One misstep, and you boil your foot with the porridge. There is no kitchen, just a corner with fewer rats. Fun fact, some Viking houses had raised platforms where people slept to be warmer. Sounds smart, right? Unfortunately, they also shared those platforms with dogs, cats, and occasionally chickens. Because heat is heat, even if it cackles. You try to clean the place with water that you have brought from a frozen stream and a broom made with twigs. The dust and ashes only settle somewhere else. All surfaces are sticky, crumbling, or suspiciously viscous. In the corner are bones from last week's stew, and no one remembers who had to throw them away. Oh, and let's not forget the plagues. Lice in the hair, fleas in the straw, mice in the food, and sometimes even weasels. If something doesn't live in your house, it's probably broken or on fire. However, somehow, this is still considered a well-kept house. People come visit and congratulate you on your home. They say, "Ah, how hot it is here," while their lungs give out halfway through the sentence. And you endure all of it. Because what else is there to do? Move with what money? With what energy to build a new house? You fix the roof, remove the stew, and stir the fire as if it were your only friend. Because it is. The irony of Viking life is that, despite all the effort dedicated to building a house, growing food, and carving runes to protect yourself, you will probably die far from home, on some foreign and muddy coast, for a sack of half-rotten barley. Glory is the official reason. But the truth is that you're just trying to feed your family and, incidentally, steal a shiny chalice. The raids seemed heroic in the village, but once abroad, with your ankles sunk in unknown mud, seeing half of your companions limp from infected wounds, it seems less like an epic saga and more like a logistical error. You dream of hot porridge, dry socks, and not dying in a puddle. And if you fall, well, that's complicated. Funeral rites are important in Viking culture. If you die in the right place and someone is left to bury you. Ideally, burial in a boat surrounded by weapons and treasures, perhaps even a loyal horse to keep you company in the afterlife. But let's be realistic. Most dead Vikings are thrown into shallow graves with the rags they have left and maybe a spoon that someone has not wanted to take home. Historians still argue about how often ship burials were performed. They were probably reserved for the rich, the famous, or people with very persuasive families. You are more likely to end up forgotten under a pile of loose stones while your companions flee from a militia armed with torches. No poems, no songs, just silence and flies. A curious detail. Some raiders carried small bones from their home to be buried with them in case they died abroad. The idea was that if they could not rest in their homeland, at least a part of them could. So now you're a battlefield victim and traveling bone messenger. The worst thing is that you don't even know if dying in combat was useful. According to Viking belief, to enter Valhalla, the afterlife of warriors, you must die wielding a weapon in honorable combat, preferably while a Valkyrie watches. But who verifies that? Was your death noble enough? Was the sword in your hand or stuck under your body? Was the Valkyrie busy that day? At home, your family could try to honor you. Perhaps they would carve your name on a runic stone, assuming they knew how to write it and were not too heartbroken. Most likely, they would focus on surviving the winter without you. Your youngest son might grow up remembering you as the one who left and never returned. Your name fades. Your legend never forms. And the loot you died for is melted down to make a spoon that someone accidentally drops into the fire. And so you disappear, not in a burst of glory, but in the cold and silent mud hundreds of kilometers from your reindeer skin pillow. And from that bowl that you like so much. Because, despite all the songs about heroes and dragons, most Vikings did not die in a legendary way, but far from home, often alone, and usually too young to grow a decent beard. But maybe, just maybe, you die the right way. With a sword in your hand and your guts spilling out theatrically. A battle cry that resonates throughout the fjord. And despite all that misery, You are finally promised your reward, the Valhalla. Except that, once again, the small print ruins everything. They told you that Valhalla is a great hall in Asgard where fallen warriors feast with Odin, drink from magical goat udders, and fight glorious battles all day, only to be healed overnight and do it again the next day. Eternal combat and endless beer. It sounds great if you like that sort of thing. But there is a catch. Several, in fact. First of all, not everyone can enter. You have to die in combat. Okay, but not by tripping over your own axe or falling off the ship. It has to be noble, visible with style. Also, you have to be seen and chosen by a Valkyrie. That's right. Your entry into the afterlife depends on being seen by a celestial warrior riding a flying horse while you bleed under a horse. If she doesn't see you, too bad. Historians still argue about how seriously the Vikings took Valhalla. Some think it was metaphorical, a spiritual reward for living bravely. Others say that for them it was as real as death itself. In any case, the belief was strong enough to send terrified teenagers in a battle in the hope of impressing the divine judges, who were frankly overwhelmed by the volume of applicants. And if you didn't pass the cut, you could end up in hell, the cold and humid beyond for the insignificant. It's not torture, just boring. Like waiting in line at the frostbitten post office. No banquets, no songs, just a humid and endless silence. Probably shared with the guy who stole your sheep 3 winters ago. There is also the ominous Ragnarok clause. Even if you manage to get to Valhalla, you won't be drinking mead forever. In the end, the gods go to war, the world ends, and you are called to fight and die again. This time permanently. So, even in the best case, the afterlife of the Vikings is a temporary job with poor severance pay. Curiosities. Some Viking funerals included funeral jewels, in which volunteers were killed to accompany the tribal chief to the afterlife as his entourage. Congratulations. You may be someone's spiritual luggage. And yet, despite all its flaws, Valhalla is what keeps you going. Through the smoke and freezing, the lice, the raids, and the broken teeth, you believe that there must be something more. That the suffering, the fear, and the endless wet will take you to a better place. It has to be like that. But now, as your breathing slows and your vision fades, you look up, not at a bright Valkyrie, but at a low rain cloud and a goat chewing on your bootlace. No choirs, no golden halls, just mud and regret. Maybe the gods are testing you. Maybe your glory has only been delayed. Or maybe, just maybe, the afterlife is another story that someone invented to keep you rowing 1 more mile. And so we gently move away from the icy fields and stormy seas of your Viking life. The axe is now silent. The fire of the long house crackles weakly, casting flickering shadows on the soot-blackened beams. The wind outside whistles through the thatched roof, but inside there is only stillness and the faint scent of wood smoke and damp wool. Your muscles no longer hurt. The cold no longer bites. Lie wrapped in furs. The sounds of the world have softened into a distant whisper. The gods, with all their noise and thunder, have finally fallen silent. No more rowing, no more shouting, no more long marches through the sleet and fog. Only the slow rhythm of your own breathing. Constant as the tide. Somewhere far away, a raven croaks. But it is not a warning, just goodbye. Maybe you have done enough. Maybe the sarcastic ones remember you, even if only in a phrase murmured by an old drunk who does not know how to rhyme. Or maybe your story, like most, will simply merge into the earth. Silent, invisible, and real. But for now, rest. Let the long darkness come. You have earned your silence. Hello, guys. Tonight we put on the crisp and gloomy leather boots of a character that you have surely seen in memes. The Plague Doctor. You already know who he is. Bird mask, black coat, spooky appearance. Most people believe he was some kind of medieval superhero. He was not. Wearing that mask did not turn you into a healer. It turned you into a walking symbol of death, a bureaucrat with a stick, a human sponge for disease. And yes, people hated you for it. So, before you get comfortable, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. And leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is for you. I always love seeing comments from all over the world. Now, dim the lights, Open the window a little if you dare, and let's begin tonight's journey into the most desperate job in history. Dawn breaks over a medieval city. The morning light does not bring hope. It only reveals what the darkness mercifully hid. Carts piled with corpses, empty streets, the smell that floats in the air like a physical presence. This is now your world. The first rays of sun filter through your closed window as you begin the morning ritual that will transform you from humans into monsters. Reach for the leather mask next to your bed, with its long curved beak pointing accusingly at the ceiling all night while you couldn't sleep. Your fingers run over the holes in the glass eyes, polished to a shine by countless hours of use. They say the eyes are the windows to the soul. These glass circles will be the only thing they see of you for the next 12 hours. You fill the beak with dried lavender, crushed mint, and rose petals. The sweet and penetrating smell floods your nostrils as you squeeze it tight, an aromatic protection against the miasma, the poisoned air that is believed to transmit disease. You add clove, cinnamon, and amber. More fragrance, more protection, more lies you tell yourself. Medieval medicine believed that the plague was spread through stale air. The beaked mask was not magical. It was desperate science in desperate times, filling the beak with pleasant smells to filter out the deadly ones, as if flowers could stop death. The leather feels cool against your face as you place the mask. The beak extends 30 centimeters in front of you, making you look like a nightmare bird. You tighten the straps behind your head, adjusting them until the eye holes are aligned. Your breathing sounds hollow inside the mask. Each inhalation brings the sweet-smelling herbs closer to your nose. Each exhalation is warm against your chin. Next comes the wide-brimmed hat, black as a starless night. You carefully place it on your head, completing the transformation. The heavy wax coat follows as your shield against contamination. You fasten it from your neck to the knee. Each closure is another barrier between you and plague. The gloves are the final thing. Rigid leather makes your fingers clumsy. The tools of your trade will be harder to handle today, but that matters little. You see yourself in a polished metal plate that hangs on the wall. What looks back is no longer human. It is a creature of nightmare, a monster with a bird head wrapped in black. The children will scream as they see you arrive. The adults will cross themselves and hurry on past. The sick will look at you with desperate hope you cannot fulfill. You do not look like a healer. You look like death itself dressed for ceremony. And that is precisely what you are. You are not a doctor, savior, or omen, but a recorder of the dying. Your presence in a home does not mean help has arrived. It means the end is close enough for documentation. You pick up your doctor's cane, a long stick to examine patients without touching, to point out ailments and keep the desperate at bay. Some colleagues use it to prick the dead, ensuring they are not just asleep before marking another casualty. The herbs in your mask are starting to work. Your world smells of spices and gardens instead of putrid disease. It is a small respite that won't last long. At noon, the stench of death will penetrate even this fragrant shield. At night, you barely will notice it. You approach the door with rigid movements in your ceremonious suit. The suit was not designed for mobility or comfort. It was designed to create distance between you and the infected and your own humanity. You look like a monster and smell like hope gone rotten. But the suit has another purpose too. When the townspeople see you, they do not see a neighbor or friend. They see the personification of plague. Their fear and hatred are not directed against you, but against what you represent. That is easier for you and them. After a last inhalation of herbal protection, you open the door and enter the sick city. Another day of death now begins. The weight of your attire oppresses your shoulders as you walk the empty streets. Each step of your heavy boots resonates against the stone, announcing your presence like a knell. The citizens peek from behind closed windows and disappear when they recognize your silhouette. Your first stop is Town Hall, where a somber secretary awaits. He avoids looking at your face as he hands you a ledger and the list of houses to visit. His hands tremble slightly as he hands you a pen and a small bottle of ink. Register all the dead. Write down all the sick. That is your primary duty. The truth behind this mask: you're not a doctor. Not really, no. The streets are deserted as you continue your way. Your bird-like shadow stretches out before you. A dark prophecy crawls on the cobblestones. Before the plague, you were a scribe, someone who knew how to read and write in a world where most did not. Your qualification for this plague doctor position was simply that you knew how to write names in a book and were not afraid of blood. Or at least that is what you told them. The fear came later, after seeing what the disease could do. Medieval cities were desperate to find someone willing to enter houses affected by the plague. The real doctors, those who had trained at the universities of Padua or Montpellier, had fled to the countryside to attend to wealthy clients or had succumbed to the disease. Those who stayed charged such exorbitant fees that only the richest could afford them. The common people were left to their fate, to suffer and die without care. So the cities hired whoever they could find. Barbers accustomed to bloodletting, apothecaries with rudimentary knowledge of herbs, medical students who had failed, and even clergymen who felt the vocation to comfort the dying. Some plague doctors were as young as 14 years old, barely old enough to understand the gravity of the task ahead. You knock on the first door with your cane. Inside, a man lies sweating on a straw mattress, with his wife by his side. Dark swellings protrude from his neck and armpits, buboes full of infection. The room smells of disease and fear. The wife looks at you with desperate hope, as if your bird-like appearance could announce some divine intervention. You put down your ledger and approach the sick man. Your movements are sure, trained. You have seen this hundreds of times before. Confidence is an act for the dying, for his wife, for yourself. You have no idea what you are doing. Really, no. The herbs in your mask cannot protect you. The leather of your gloves is too thin to really protect you from contagion. You press the buboes with your wooden cane, noting their size and color. You ask about fever, about headaches, about when the symptoms started. These questions have no purpose other than ritual. You already know what ails him. You already know how this story ends. From a bag on your belt, you take out a flask of herbal tincture. The same lavender and mint that fills your mask, now soaked in vinegar. It will not serve to cure the plague, but it could relieve the fever or at least provide the comfort of having done something. You instruct the wife to administer 3 drops every few hours. She nods enthusiastically, grabbing the flask as if it were her salvation. Her eyes, above the cloth mask, look at you with the reverence usually reserved for priests. The cities paid the plague doctors a decent salary, much more than a scribe could earn in normal times. The high salary did not reflect skill, but scarcity. Few were willing to take on such a dangerous job. Some plague doctors were provided with free accommodation, tax exemptions, or even citizenship rights if they were foreigners. The benefits were substantial because the risk was immense. But no amount of money could buy real medical knowledge. The training period for a plague doctor could be as short as a single day, enough to learn how to put on protective equipment and record deaths in the ledger. Your medical training consisted mainly of theories about humors and miasmas transmitted by ancient texts that had never been questioned. You take notes in a registry. Name, age, symptoms, prognosis. You write the last part in Latin, a language that common people cannot read. It protects them from the harsh reality. It protects you from having to say it out loud. You see yourself reflected in a fogged mirror hanging on the wall, the beaked mask, the wide-brimmed hat, the long robe, all creating an illusion of authority. But behind this disguise, you're just a bureaucrat with a cane pretending to deal with the apocalypse. Your main qualification is knowing how to read and write, not any medical knowledge. Your main objective is not to cure, but to count and quantify the catastrophe so city officials can follow its evolution. Leaving the house, making the sign of the cross on the door with your cane, the herbs of your mask, now mixed with the smell of disease, you wonder if real doctors know more than you do. There, expensive education taught them to balance the humors and align the planets, not about invisible killers carried by fleas on rats. Their cures are as useless as your tinctures and prayers are. The difference is that they know it. You suspect as much, and you hope that neither of you is right. You return to the street, adjusting your mask, preparing to continue your somber procession through the dying city. The usual sweepers are dead, dying, or in hiding. There is no one left to clean up the daily accumulation of a city's existence. What was swept away before now remains, rotting in summer heat. You stop at intersection, leaning on your cane to catch breath. The herbs in your mask have begun to lose their scent, now dominated by the smell of the city's sick. Under the lavender and mint, you now smell it. The unmistakable smell of putrefaction. Not only the putrefaction of garbage and waste, but also that of flesh. Human flesh. Medieval cities were filthy even in the best of times. The narrow streets served as a dump for everything people wanted to eliminate. Food scraps, human waste, animal corpses. Animal corpses. Butchers killed animals in the middle of the street, letting the blood spill into the same sewers where children played. Tanners used urine and feces in their work, filling neighborhoods with an ammonia stench so strong it made eyes water. But the plague transformed this daily misery into something far worse. The systems that barely kept the cities habitable had now collapsed. The men who collected the nocturnal excrement had disappeared. The women who emptied the chamber pots in designated areas now emptied them through windows for fear of going out. The pigs that once roamed the streets eating garbage now rot alongside their owners. You walk carefully around a pile on the road, covered with a dirty sheet. The shape guessed underneath is unmistakably human. Not everyone waits for the death carts anymore. Some families push their dead into the street and retreat to their homes, hoping someone else will take care of remains. The smell intensifies as you approach the next house. Before you can call, the door opens and a gaunt man beckons you to enter without a word. Inside, the stench is now unbearable. Your mask already protects you very little. 3 people lie on pallets on the floor, all at different stages of the disease. An old woman is already passed, but no one has closed her eyes or covered her face. A young man writhes amid fever. His buboes burst, oozing a dark liquid. A girl no more than 6 breathes with difficulty. The revealing swellings begin to form on her neck. There is no separation between the sick and the healthy in these tiny homes. There is no isolation or quarantine here. Everyone breathes the same air, touches the same surfaces, shares a bucket of water. The disease spreads through homes like fire through dry straw. You move among them, your leather coat brushing against bedding soaked in sweat and worse. Your gloves, already stained from previous recognitions, grow more moist with each patient you touch. The wax layer on your clothes begins to soften in the stifling heat of the crowded room. Medieval medicine did not have the concept of germs or contagion as we understand it today. There were no gloves to change between patients, no hand washing or disinfectants. The plague doctor's suit, with all its theatrical protection, was not designed with true hygiene in mind. It could not prevent the invisible transmission of disease. You take notes in the accounting book, trying to keep its pages clean despite your dirty gloves. The father asks if there is any hope for his son. You nod because you don't dare tell him the truth. The herbs in your beaked mask have completely lost their effect, and each breath fills your lungs with the smell of death. When you leave, you carry the house with you. Its smell sticks to your clothes. Its fluids soak into the leather. Its desperation weighs on your mind. You will take pieces of this house to the next and the next. Your rounds create a network connecting the sick and dying throughout the city. By noon, your feet are soaked inside your boots with the accumulated dirt from a dozen houses. Your coat has absorbed so many smells that it seems to have acquired a life of its own. The mask that should protect you from the miasma now seems to trap death against your face. You don't cure anyone. You immerse yourself in their final smells. You're not a doctor who visits patients. You are a collector of human misery, accumulating it on your clothes as if it were a dreadful harvest. As you approach the next house, you realize that beneath all the other stenches, there is a new one, barely perceptible, but growing stronger. It emanates from you. The coppery, Swedish smell of your own sweat tinged with something unknown. You wonder if that is what fear smells like, or if perhaps it is the first sign of the disease making its way through your elaborate defenses. You put that thought aside and knock on the door with your cane. There's work to do, records to keep, false comfort to give. The dirt and stench are now just another part of your daily life, as common as breathing. But with each house you enter, each body you examine, each family you have failed to save, you can't help but feel that you are sinking deeper into the mud, and that soon it will completely cover you. The afternoon sun beats on your black coat as you approach a modest house on the outskirts of the city. Your leather suit, designed to keep diseases away, now traps heat and sweat inside. Each movement produces a creaking sound as moisture accumulates in every fold and wrinkle. But it is not just the discomfort that overwhelms you today. It is knowing that nothing in your medical briefcase will save the people inside this house. You knock with your cane, and a tired-looking woman opens the door. Her eyes are sunken from exhaustion, and her skin pale from fear. Without a word, she leads you to a back room where her husband lies on a bed, his neck and armpits swollen with buboes the size of eggs. Two small children are sitting in a corner, watching with wide eyes as you approach their father. You put the briefcase down and begin your usual routine. First, you examine the buboes with your cane, gently pressing against the swollen lymph nodes. The man grimaces in pain, and his eyes fill with tears. You have already seen these black inflammations hundreds of times. They are death made visible under skin. Treatments against the medieval plague were based on medical theories that go back to ancient Greece and Rome. Doctors believed that health depended on the balance of four bodily fluids called humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Diseases resulted from an imbalance of these humors, which could be corrected by removing excess fluid. You reach into the bag and take out a set of brass cups and a small torch. Cupping therapy, which creates suction against the skin to extract harmful humors, was a common treatment for almost any ailment. You heat each cup and place it on a man's back, watching as the skin rises when a vacuum is created. The cups leave red circles when removed, but the buboes remain intact. Next, you take out a narrow blade and a bowl to collect blood. The wife turns around, unable to see what will happen. You select a vein in the man's arm as far from the buboes as possible and make a precise incision. The blood flows into the bowl, dark and thick. The bleeding aims to restore balance and drain disease. But you have performed this ritual countless times and never seen it cure plague. Some of your medical companions have more elaborate plague methods. They prick the buboes directly, releasing a putrid mix of blood, pus, and lymph. Others apply leeches to extract blood in small amounts for longer periods. The more educated doctors prescribe complex herbal remedies with dozens of ingredients. Powdered emerald, unicorn horn, actually a narwhal tusk, or even crushed Egyptian mummies. The rich pay fortunes for exotic treatments. The poor settle for onions, garlic, and pigeon droppings applied to the inflammations. Nothing works, neither for the rich, nor the poor, nor for anyone. You bandage the man's arm and move to the next treatment. From your bag, you take a small earthenware vessel with ointment made of goose fat and herbs. You instruct the wife to apply it to the buboes 3 times daily. The ointment could relieve pain a little, but it will not stop the disease's progression. The husband asks how much time he has. An honest answer would be 3, maybe 4 days. Instead, you talk about recovery, strength, and fighting disease. Your words are as useless as your treatments, but it's the only thing you can offer. The children continue watching from a corner, faces showing neither hope nor understanding. You wonder if they, too, will soon develop symptoms. You wonder if the woman has been infected already. You wonder if you're taking the disease home each night. Before leaving, you write a prescription on a small piece of parchment. The writing is intentionally elaborate, with flourishes and Latin abbreviations few could decipher. It recommends a tincture of rosemary and wine, with prayers recited at sunset and sunrise. The recipe's complexity gives it an air of legitimacy, of medical authority. But the truth is simpler. Nothing prescribed on that parchment will save this man. As you prepare to leave, you advise the family about preventive measures. Clean the house with vinegar. Burn juniper branches to purify air. Avoid melancholic thoughts, as they make the body susceptible to disease. These recommendations come from the same medical text that suggests rubbing a live chicken on the buboes to extract poison. Some of your colleagues recommend even more extreme measures. Avoid bathing, as it opens pores to disease. Sit near hot fires, even in summer, to burn miasma. Consume your own urine mixed with molasses as protective tonic. Wear a dead toad around your neck to absorb poison from the air. You are not curing anyone. You're only part of the ritual before death. Outside, you make a mark on the doorpost, a record for city officials tracking the disease's spread. It joins dozens of similar marks in the neighborhood. Your official duty is fulfilled. Another home counted in the plague registry. The sun is lower now, casting long shadows across the street. You have 3 more houses to visit before night falls. 3 more families to treat with useless remedies. 3 more false promises to make. With each failed treatment, something inside you hardens. The gap between what you pretend to do and what you achieve widens. You are an actor in a macabre play, performing gestures that mean nothing while people die around you. However, you keep going from house to house, day after day, because even useless rituals provide comfort to the dying. Even a false hope is better than none. And because there is nothing more to do than wait for the plague to die out, consuming 1 in 3 people in its path. You adjust the mask, its beak pointing forward like an accusation, and head to the next house on your list. The sun begins to descend toward the horizon as you advance through the streets. The shadows lengthen, spreading like dark fingers over the cobblestones. Now you move more quickly, aware that you must finish your round before night falls. The darkness brings dangers that even the plague doctors fear. A woman sees you from her house's door. Her face contorts as she recognizes you, and she hurries to usher her 2 small children inside. The door slams shut. You hear the heavy wooden bar fall into place. Inside, a prayer begins, so loud that it pierces the walls. They're not protecting themselves from a plague. They're protecting themselves from you. Your black silhouette has become synonymous with death in this city. When people see your beaked mask and your wide-brimmed hat, they don't think of healing or comfort. They think of last rites, of death certificates, of corpses piled in carts. Your arrival on their street means that someone is dying or soon will be. You knock on the door is the sound they fear most. In the window of a tavern, a man makes the sign against evil as you pass. Another spits in your direction, although he keeps his distance. The tavern keeper frowns and closes the shutters. Even in times of plague, the taverns remain open. Fear and pain push many to drink, but they don't serve you. Nobody wants to share a jar with the bird of death. Medieval communities were deeply superstitious. When the plague decimated towns and villages throughout Europe, people desperately sought explanations and someone to blame. The Jews were massacred, accused of poisoning wells. Cats were killed, considered familiars of witches, and the plague doctors, with their strange bird-like appearance and their ineffective treatments, became objects of hope and hatred. You turn through a narrow alley as a shortcut to your next patient. Halfway there, 3 figures block your path. They are young men, thinned by hunger, but emboldened by fear and cheap wine. One holds an improvised club made from a table leg. Another wields a stone the size of a fist. "My mother died yesterday," says the one with the club after your visit. You grip your doctor's cane more strongly. It is your only weapon, although you have never used it as such. You retreat slowly. These confrontations are becoming more common as the plague advances, the treatments fail, and the dead outnumber the living. "The plague killed your mother," you say, your voice muffled by the mask. "I try to help." Liar. The stone fly passes a few centimeters from your head. You take it with you. Devil's bird. You turn around and start running, your heavy coat hindering your movements. Behind you, his steps echo on the stones, and then they vanish when they decide not to follow the pursuit. For some, you are an easy target for their pain and rage. Others sincerely believe you are a spreader of disease. They are not entirely wrong. Your movements from house to house, your contaminated clothes, your unwashed hands. It is possible that you really are a carrier of death. But that is not what they accuse you of. They speak of curses, of poison, of deliberate malice. Outside a church, a priest delivers a sermon before a small group gathered in the street. The places of worship remain open, though many now hold services outdoors to reduce contagion risk. As you pass by, his words become clearly audible. And these doctors, if we can call them that, move among us like the very angels of death. Their faces are a mockery of God's creatures. Their treatments are ineffective, their presence an omen. Is it a coincidence that death follows where they walk? Or is it perhaps God's judgment for our dependence on worldly medicine instead of heavenly salvation? The crowd murmurs in agreement. Several heads turn to look at you. The priest meets your gaze through the glass eyes of your mask. His expression is one of barely concealed contempt. He makes the sign of the cross, not as a blessing, but as protection from evil. The clergy and the plague doctors maintained an uncomfortable relationship. Expect a different reception. The educated classes usually have more faith in medicine than superstitions. But when you arrive, a servant greets you at the door instead of opening it. He hands you a bag of coins and a letter. The merchant has decided to hire another doctor, one who studied in Padua and claims to have a special remedy imported from Constantinople. Your services are no longer needed. It is not the first time you have been fired in favor of a more promising doctor. The rich have the luxury of hope, of believing that someone somewhere has found an effective cure. They can afford to pursue that hope from doctor to doctor. The poor only have you, with your municipal salary and useless treatments. As you put away the coins, a small group gathers across the street. They watch you in silence, with hostile faces. A child begins to sing a rhyme that has become popular recently. Beak and black plague on his back. Where he stops, the living drop. Count the dead on his way. The adults. Do not silence the child. Some join in. You're supposed to save the sick, but even the healthy fear you. Your attempts to offer comfort are received with suspicion. Your medical authority is undermined by your continuous failures. Every day, as the number of dead increases, the hatred grows stronger. You are the face of the plague, the embodiment of their suffering. Night falls quickly. You should go back to your house, to your empty rooms, where no one will step aside from your path or spit at you as you pass. But you have one more house on your list, one more family counting down the hours until your arrival. They will not welcome you, but they need you, not for your medicines, but for your authority to declare the death of their loved ones and formalize what they already know. You straighten your hat, adjust your mask, and continue down the street. The crowd reluctantly opens to let you pass, their whispers following like shadows. Devil's bird, bearer of death, act like a crow. You keep walking, alone in a city full of people, hated, feared, yet desperately needed. Darkness has almost fallen when you approach the last house on the list. Your steps are heavy. Your body aches after a day moving in that restrictive leather suit. The wax coat that this morning seemed protective now seems like a prison, which retains heat, sweat, and something much worse. You're a walking reservoir of disease. The last house is small, hidden between two larger buildings. A single candle burns in the window. You knock with your cane, and a young woman opens for you. Her face is emaciated from fatigue. She does not recoil at your appearance. She was waiting for you. Inside, a man lies on a straw mattress, his breathing labored. The buboes on his neck have burst, spilling a dark liquid that stains the bedding. The smell is unbearable, even through your herb-filled mask. Without being told, you know it's her husband. Without examining him, you know he will not survive the night. You kneel beside him, your coat brushing the damp bedding. The leather easily absorbs the liquid, adding another layer to your already dirty clothes. Your gloves are stiff from dried fluids of prior examinations. Your cane, which has touched dozens of inflamed lymph nodes today, rests uncleaned and untreated against the wall. Medieval medicine had no idea about bacteria or viruses. Germ theory as a cause of disease would not be established until centuries later. The plague doctor's suit, although intimidating in appearance, offered virtually no practical protection against Yersinia pestis, the bacterium causing bubonic plague. Instead, it turned whoever wore it into a mobile point of contagion. You check the man's pulse, the contaminated glove pressing his wrist. You listen to his breathing, leaning so close your mask almost touches his face. Examine the erupting buboes, pricking inflamed tissue with your cane. Each action can transmit the disease from your last patient to this one, from this dying man to the next house you visit tomorrow. The plague bacteria was transmitted through fleas that infested rats, but it could also spread through droplets in the air when it reached the lungs, or by direct contact with infected bodily fluids. The plague doctor, who went from house to house, touching one patient after another without washing or changing equipment, became an involuntary messenger of death. Will he recover? The woman asks, though her tone suggests she knows. You shake your head slowly. Your voice sounds distant inside the mask. Make him comfortable. I can give you something for the pain. From your bag, you take out a small bottle of tincture. Alcohol infused with poppy. It will alleviate his suffering, but will do nothing to stop the disease. Your fingers struggle with the cork. Leather gloves make fine motor control difficult. The woman takes the bottle, her bare fingers brushing your glove. Contact, transmission, possible infection. You note the man's condition in your ledger, your pen scratching the parchment. The book has become a vector for disease, as it was on infected bedding, touched by contaminated gloves, and breathed on by dying men. Tomorrow you will take it to the town hall, where clerks will handle its pages, transferring bacteria to their hands, faces, and food. The cycle goes on. You rise to leave, joints stiff from kneeling. Turning to the door, you see a little girl watching from the shadows of a room. She is barely 4 or 5 years old. She stares at your mask with wide, frightened eyes. You raise a hand in what you hope is a reassuring gesture. The mother sees this and quickly approaches the girl, pushing her into shadow. Get away, she whispers, not to the girl but to you. Go away. She knows it, perhaps not scientifically, but instinctively. She intuits that your presence brings more than the record of death. It brings its cause with it. Outside, the night air feels cool against the mask's eye holes. The stars begin to appear in the darkening sky, indifferent to suffering. You stand for a moment alone in the empty street and realize a deep exhaustion that goes beyond physical fatigue. Your clothes feel heavy, not only from the weight of leather and wax, but also from the invisible burden of disease. Every fiber has been exposed to plague. The hem of your coat has dragged through streets. The beak of your mask has been filled with breath of the sick. Your cane has touched more infected flesh than anything in the city, and tomorrow you will take it all to new homes, to new victims. Some plague doctors try to lessen this risk. They burn their clothes, though few could change them daily. Some wash their hands in vinegar, believing its acidic nature would purify them. Others refuse to touch patients and use their canes for examinations. But these precautions were based on the miasma theory of disease, rather than on knowledge of bacteria. They were safety measures rather than effective ones. You begin a long walk home through the dark streets. Your route takes you past houses you visited this week. Several now have death marks on the doors, new since your visit. You can't help but wonder how many of those deaths you may have accelerated with your examinations, contaminated equipment, and travels between sick homes. It is a terrible burden to bear, to suspect that the mere act of trying to help may be causing harm, that under the suit, behind the mask, you are not the adversary of death, but its accomplice, its carrier, its vector. You pass a fountain and stop, overwhelmed by the need to clean yourself. You take off a glove and dip your bare hand into the cold water, watching the dirt of the day wash away from your skin. But you know this cleaning is useless against the microscopic killers that have made your suit home. The fountain water will now carry your contamination to all who drink tomorrow. You pull your hand back as if you've been burned and hastily put your glove back on. There's no escape from this cycle. There is no way to break the chain of transmission when its existence is unknown. You are a healer who spreads disease, a doctor who brings death home. The plague may be inside you already, and if not today, maybe tomorrow or the next day. The odds increase with each house and patient you enter or touch. Your protective suit has become your greatest vulnerability, a contagion collection system that never leaves. You resume walking, with your shadow lengthening like that of a bird in the light of the crescent moon. The city sleeps restlessly around you, unaware that its guardian carries the danger it fears most. You survive the day, but the plague travels with you, patient and invisible, waiting to transform you from doctor to patient, from recorder to statistic. The small room you call home is above a candle shop on a quiet street. The smell of tallow and wax from below usually permeates everything. But tonight, your own stench dominates everything. You climb the narrow stairs, each step an effort, while tiredness takes over your bones. Inside, a single candle burns on a simple wooden table. The flame casts long shadows on the sparse furniture. A bed, a chair, a trunk with your few belongings. The walls are not decorated with personal objects. There is no one waiting to welcome you. Plague doctors rarely maintained close relationships. The risk was too great, the burden too heavy to share. You begin the laborious process of removing your protective suit. First, the hat, carefully placed on its stand. Then the mask, with the beak still filled with herbs that no longer give off any aroma. Your face feels strange without it, exposed and vulnerable after a day hidden under the leather. Red marks wrinkle your skin where the straps have dug in. Your fingers, clumsy with tiredness, struggle with the closures of your coat. The waxed leather sticks to the clothes you wear underneath, reluctant to let go. When it finally comes off, the linen shirt underneath is soaked with sweat and stained with fluids whose origin you prefer not to contemplate. Each garment of the plague doctor's suit had to be cleaned regularly, fumigated with herbs, and aired in the sun. But the reality was different. The leather was difficult to wash properly. Processing the suit took hours that the exhausted doctors did not have. Many wore the same clothes for days, even weeks, without cleaning them thoroughly. You should burn these clothes. Start from scratch tomorrow. But new leather is expensive, and your salary in the city, although better than most, has its limits. Instead, you clean the cape with vinegar, hang it near the window where the night air could eliminate some of the stench, and promise yourself that tomorrow you will do better. The room seems empty and crowded at the same time. Empty of company, crowded with the invisible specters of those you treated today. Their faces remain in your mind as you pour water from a pail into a basin and begin to wash. The water turns gray, then black as you rub your hands, face, neck. As much as you washed, it seemed insufficient. Loneliness was the constant companion of the plague doctor. The nature of the work imposed isolation. Many professionals lived in designated housing, away from the general population. Others, like you, rented rooms where landlords were willing to accept the risk for a higher payment. Family members often refused contact for fear of contagion. Friends moved away, uncomfortable with your daily proximity to death. You eat a simple meal of bread and cheese that the chandler's wife has left at your door. She no longer brings it to you in person, not since the plague arrived in the city. The food has no flavor. You force yourself to swallow, knowing that you need strength for tomorrow's round. Tonight it will not be difficult for you to fall asleep. You never do. Every time you close your eyes, you see the faces of today's patients. You hear their labored breathing, their pleas for relief, their questions about whether they will survive. You gave them false hope, knowing that the truth was too cruel to say aloud. Most plague doctors did not survive a major outbreak. The statistics varied according to the location and period, but the mortality rates among medical professionals were astonishingly high. In some cities, it was necessary to name several plague doctors in rapid succession, as each succumbed to the illness that he treated. The protective suit, of impressive appearance, offered little real defense from infection. You cough once, then again. A normal reflex, you tell yourself, just clearing your throat after breathing through a mask all day. It is not the first symptom of illness, nor the beginning of the end. But you cannot help checking your armpits, your neck, running your fingers through the lymph nodes, looking for any swelling or sensitivity. There is nothing. Not tonight. A feeling of relief washes over you, followed immediately by shame. How many more times will you wake up searching your body for signs of buboes? The death sentence that seems to hover just outside your reach. An outside noise draws you toward the window. A cart moves slowly through the street. The lanterns hanging on the sides cast a macabre light on the cobblestones. The death cart makes its nocturnal round. Two men walk beside it, their faces covered with cloths, shouting the familiar refrain. Bring out your dead. A door opens. A wrapped bundle is handed to the collectors. Without ceremony, without prolonged goodbyes. Only another body for the ever larger pits that are outside the walls of the city. Someday soon it could be you. Not the collector, but the collected one. An unnamed bundle transported without ceremony, buried without a headstone in a mass grave. If the plague takes you, there will be no family to mourn you, no friends to remember your name, no colleagues to note your passing in the city's registers. The plague doctors were as disposable as the herbs in their masks, replaced and forgotten just as easily. You move from the window and turn off the candle. The darkness envelopes the room, a temporary escape from the visual reminders of reality. But the sounds linger. The rumble of the death cart, the somber announcement of the messenger, the occasional sob from a house surrendering its dead. In the darkness, you allow yourself a moment of true emotion, something you cannot show during your rounds. Fear, not only of death, which in the end arrives for everyone, but of this death in particular, painful, ugly, and completely solitary, to join the anonymous dead in the plague pits, to disappear without leaving a trace or memory. The medieval mentality considered the plague a divine punishment, the work of malevolent forces, a result of planetary alignments or poisoned air. What it could not conceive was the arbitrary nature of infection, the randomness of survival and death. For each person who contracted the plague and died, another could be repeatedly exposed without ever getting sick. There was no pattern, no justice, no sense in who lived or died. When sleep finally comes, your thoughts turn toward the next day's rounds. The same streets, the same procedures, the same useless treatments, the same risk passed from house to house like an unwanted gift, the same solitude. Perhaps tomorrow is the day you develop symptoms. Perhaps it is within a week or a month. Perhaps you are one of the fortunate few that somehow survives the outbreak without suffering any damage. But statistics and experience suggest otherwise. The plague has taken most of your predecessors in this role. It continues to take your colleagues from neighboring districts. The city keeps a list of substitute plague doctors ready to be named when the current ones get sick. One morning, you simply will not wake. Or you will wake up and notice that the telltale swellings begin and that the fever increases. Your landlord will find your body, call the death carriage, and rent your room to the next plague doctor appointed to take your place. Your body will be incinerated with the rest. Without a name, without a grave. As consciousness fades, a final thought arises in your exhausted mind. Perhaps this is mercy. To disappear completely. To leave no one behind. To mourn. To take your failures and your contamination to the grave without harming anyone. To put an end to the cycle of useless treatments and false hopes. Sleep claims you at last, deep and without dreams. Tomorrow awaits with its beak-shaped mask and its black beauties, its procession of dying faces, its slow accumulation of risk. One more day of walking among the disease, of breathing death, of surviving when so many do not. Until the day arrives when you no longer do, centuries pass. The mass graves outside the city walls are forgotten, covered by new roads, new buildings, new lives. The plague that once emptied the streets and filled the death carts fades into history books and academic articles. The world moves on as always, but something remains. A silhouette, a memory in the shape of a bird. The plague doctor's mask survives in museum collections, carefully preserved behind glass. Its empty eye sockets stare at the visitors who curiously observe this relic of medieval medicine. They touch their telephones, take photos, and move on to the next exhibition. Few stop to think about the person who once wore something like that, who sweated behind the leather, who struggled to breathe through the herb-filled beak. In the celebrations of the Venetian carnival, revelers wear elaborate versions of the plague doctor's mask decorated with gold leaf and colored paint. They pose for photographs in St. Mark's Square. They are beautiful nightmares against the ancient architecture. The mask that once meant suffering now represents mystery, intrigue, celebration. The transformation from medical tool to party disguise is complete. Online stores sell plague doctor masks as Halloween accessories, advertising them with cheerful descriptions. Scare your friends with this authentic costume. Children dress up as plague doctors for costume contests. Their small bodies are covered with miniature black robes. Their innocent faces are hidden behind beaked masks. They have no idea what that suit meant, of the death that it witnessed, of the death that it often preceded. Historical reenactments feature actors dressed in plague doctor costumes reciting scripts about miasma theory and herbal remedies. They pose with their staffs, show their tools, and explain their techniques. Everything is very educational, very aseptic. The fear, the hatred, the contamination, the loneliness are not mentioned. The anonymous death in a rented room above a chandler's shop is not mentioned. In video games, plague doctors appear as mysterious characters. Sometimes they're villains, sometimes healers with magical powers. In horror movies, their silhouettes are silhouetted in fog-shrouded streets, threatening the protagonists with their inhuman appearance. In fantasy art, they stand in the middle of apocalyptic landscapes, with their beaked profiles silhouetted against burning skies. The internet welcomes the plague doctor as a meme, a source of dark humor about disease and death. Social networks are filled with stylized illustrations every time a new disease appears in the headlines. The bird-shaped mask becomes a symbol far removed from its historical reality, an aesthetic choice more than a desperate, failed attempt at protection. Comic conventions feature attendees in elaborate plague doctor costumes, posing dramatically for photographers and winning awards for their craftsmanship and creativity. Their costumes are works of art, with perfect leatherwork, masks sculpted in great detail, and staffs carved with intricate designs. They are beautiful in a way that no real plague doctor ever was. The tattoo artists capture the distinctive silhouette on the skin of those who dare. The curved beak, round eyes, and wide-brimmed hat. The image joins other symbols of mortality in modern iconography, along with skulls, ravens, and hourglasses. The plague doctor becomes immortal through artistic reproduction, enjoying the memory denied to those who actually wore the mask. Historians and scholars of medicine write articles analyzing the attire of the plague doctor, debating its effectiveness and tracing its evolution during different outbreaks. Academic conferences include presentations on the cultural importance of the plague doctor in various European regions, all very erudite, very far from the experience lived by those who traveled through dying cities and recorded the dead in water-stained accounting books. But what would you think of this strange afterlife for your profession? Of this transformation of your daily reality into symbol and entertainment? What would you think of children dressed like you for fun? Of the partygoers who wear decorative versions of your respiratory system, of your image reproduced as decoration? Perhaps this fascination with the adornments of your profession would baffle you, while the essence of your experience remains unexplored. The loneliness of returning every night to empty rooms. The fear of checking for symptoms every morning. The weight of useless knowledge in the face of an unstoppable disease. The horror of suspecting that you are spreading what you are trying to contain. Knowing that your death will go unnoticed, that your body will be disposed of without ceremony. Or perhaps you would find a bitter satisfaction in the cultural persistence of the plague doctor. Your profession may have failed in its mission to treat the plague, save the sick, protect the healthy, but it has managed to engrave its image in collective memory. Failed doctors, but successful symbols. The beaked mask designed to protect against a miasma that did not exist proved useless against bacteria that had not yet been discovered. But it protected something completely different, the humanity of the plague doctor. Behind the leather, the doctor could maintain a professional distance. Behind the glass eyes, tears could fall unseen. Behind the beak, expressions of horror and impotence remain private. Perhaps that is why the image endures. Not because the plague doctors were effective healers, but because they embodied humanity's response to an overwhelming disaster. The suit represents both the futility of our defenses against nature's most devastating forces and our determination to try anyway, to impose order through ritual, to face death with professional composure, even when we know we cannot win. The modern world has its own plague doctors, medical professionals who face new epidemics with protective suits and respirators, making their rounds through hospital wards instead of city streets. Like their medieval counterparts, they record symptoms, administer treatments, and maintain professional distance while witnessing suffering at close range. Unlike their predecessors, they have germ theory, antibiotics, and knowledge of contagiousness to guide their efforts. However, some things have not changed. The isolation from loved ones for fear of contagion, the psychological burden of treating a disease that can also kill them, the transformation of individuals into symbols in the eyes of the public. The weight of the protective equipment may be different, but the weight of responsibility remains the same. So maybe the legacy is not entirely a lie. The image of the plague doctor endures not as a historical curiosity, but as a reminder of the persistence of humanity when facing overwhelming mortality. The curved beak points forward through the centuries like a question. What would you do when facing death on an unimaginable scale? Would you flee, or would you stay? Would you put on a mask, knowing that its protection is largely illusory? Would you make your rounds, knowing that your treatments are ineffective? Modern eyes may see only the strange silhouette, the theatrical costume, the memorable profile. They may not see the person inside. Scared, exhausted, lonely, often young and unprepared for the burden imposed on them. They may not understand that beneath the appearance of authority lies a painful awareness of powerlessness. That behind the mask of death there is someone desperately trying to keep it at bay. You became a symbol, but never a hero. The image of the plague doctor achieves what the plague doctor could not. A kind of immortality, persistence beyond the grave. Your name has been lost, your grave is not marked, your death records are filed and forgotten. But your silhouette remains easily recognizable, reproduced endlessly. The figure with a bird's head on the edge of disaster, without fleeing or overcoming, simply witnessing it and recording the number of victims. Perhaps that's legacy enough to be remembered, not for success, but for showing up anyway. For walking toward suffering when others fled. For trying to heal even when healing seemed impossible. The true legacy of the plague doctor isn't the mask that endures in carnivals and costumes. It is the decision they made each morning when putting it on. In the dark corners of medieval society, far from resplendent courts and honorable knights, figures lurked that we now idealize as assassins. But forget everything you've seen in movies and video games. The reality was darker, more desperate, and ultimately tragic. Unlike the elegant, trained assassins of modern fantasy, they were not born into secret guilds nor trained from childhood in mountain fortresses. They were desperate, condemned men who had nothing to lose. Former soldiers fallen into disgrace, criminals seeking protection, outcasts with skills, but no place in society. People pushed to the margins where morality becomes flexible and survival prevails over conscience. These men were not chosen for exceptional combat prowess or intelligence. What made them valuable was their expendability. When powerful men needed to eliminate someone without leaving a trace, they looked for those who could disappear afterwards, either blending into the shadows of society or disappearing forever. Recruitment took place in taverns and prisons, in debtor neighborhoods, and among the homeless. A whisper of opportunity, a chance to earn money or escape punishment. Perhaps a chance to take revenge on a society that had marginalized them. The promises were vague but tempting. Wealth, protection, even respect perhaps. The dangers were rarely mentioned. In some exceptional cases, such as that of the infamous Nazari Ismailis, often called Hashishin, recruitment took on religious dimensions. They were not common mercenaries, but devoted followers of a cause who believed their actions served a higher purpose. However, even in this case, most recruits came from poor backgrounds, attracted by the promise of paradise, both in this life and the next. The training wasn't the multi-year martial excellence regime that we imagine today. Most assassins received minimal instruction, enough to approach a target and attack effectively. They learned to blend in, appear harmless, and get close enough for a sword or poison to do its job. Some already had skills. Former soldiers knew how to kill. Thieves knew how to move stealthily. And servants knew how to go unnoticed in the presence of the powerful. The most important thing was not skill, but reliability. Would they fulfill their mission? Would they remain silent if captured? The perfect assassin was not the most skilled fighter, but the most obedient tool. Someone who would sacrifice everything, including their life, to complete the mission. Someone whose loyalty surpassed their instinct for survival. Thus began the dark career of the medieval assassin, not with glory or special powers, but with desperation and manipulation. They were not elite agents, but pawns in the games of the powerful. The first lesson they learned was not how to kill, but how little their own lives were worth to those who employed them. The shadows could offer them an escape from poverty or punishment, but they rarely provided what was really promised. For most, becoming an assassin was not the start of a legendary career. It was simply exchanging one form of desperation for another, often deadlier. Once recruited, the real transformation began. Medieval assassins underwent very different training than what's shown in modern entertainment. It wasn't about acrobatics or elegant sword fights. It was psychological conditioning designed to create obedient assassins who followed orders without question and accepted their likely death. For groups like the legendary Hashishin, indoctrination began with isolation. Separated from their previous lives, the recruits entered a world where their only reality was what their teachers told them. Religious fanaticism became a very powerful tool. Leaders like Hassani Saba understood that men would do more for faith than they would for money. The recruits listened to stories about the paradise awaiting those who died in service of the cause, a powerful motivation in an era of strong religious beliefs. Some historical accounts describe how the Hashishin leaders drugged recruits with hashish and took them to elaborate hidden gardens inside the fortress walls. Upon awakening in these artificial paradises, with food, wine, and women, the recruits were told they had glimpsed the afterlife awaiting loyal followers. Whether these stories are entirely true remains debatable, but the psychological manipulation was real and effective. For secular assassins, training focused more intently on practical skills and fear. They learned to move silently, identify poisons, and quickly strike vital areas. Their teachers were not martial arts masters, but experienced assassins who taught efficient brutality. Why learn elaborate sword techniques when a simple knife between ribs was enough? Why master dozens of weapons when only a hidden blade was needed? Physical training emphasized subtlety over raw strength. They spent hours practicing how to hide weapons and clothing, how to approach targets without arousing suspicion, and how to blend into crowds. The assassins learned to pose as servants, beggars, pilgrims, or merchants, roles that guaranteed them access without attracting undue attention. The best weapon was not the sharpest dagger, but a convincing disguise. Mental conditioning proved as vital as physical skills. The manipulators deliberately dehumanized targets, describing them as obstacles rather than people. Some assassins did not even know why their targets had to die. They simply received their orders. This separation from the reasons motivating the murder made it easier for them to act without hesitation when the time came. The most effective psychological tool was pure fatalism. Assassins were taught to accept death as an inevitable outcome of their profession. Success meant a possible escape, but probably pursuit for the rest of their lives. Failure meant certain and often painful execution. By accepting this reality from the beginning, they could act without the hesitation that fear causes. This brutal psychological conditioning created assassins very different from our modern image of a master assassin. They were not proud professionals, but broken men rebuilt for a single purpose. They did not brag or boast openly. They did not collect any trophies. They simply waited for orders, carried them out, and hoped to survive one more day in a world that considered them little more than expendable tools. With mind and body forged into a lethal instrument, the medieval assassin now faced the task itself, the mission. The mission that would likely define the brief remainder of his life. Orders came suddenly, often without warning or any possibility of choice. A messenger appeared with sealed instructions or just a whispered name. For those who worked in organized groups like the Hashishin, orders could come directly from their leader or through a chain of trusted intermediaries. 4 lone assassins linked to noble houses or political factions. A butler or advisor could deliver the order with thinly veiled threats if they hesitated. The most striking aspect of these missions was the scant information assassins usually received. Modern fiction portrays elaborate briefings with details about the target's background. Reality did not offer such luxury. Most assassins only knew what was strictly necessary: who had to die, their approximate location, and when the job had to be done. The motive always remained a mystery. This was not simply cruelty, but a calculated strategy. An assassin who knew too much became a liability. Once the target was identified, the planning began. Far from the elaborate plans of modern thrillers, the planning of medieval assassinations was meticulously methodical. Days or weeks could be spent simply observing the target from afar. Where was he going exactly? Who was accompanying him at all times? What patterns repeated themselves in their movements? An official could visit the same church each Sunday. A merchant could travel the same route to his office. A noble could hunt in same forest on certain days. This surveillance was done without modern tech or informant networks. Instead, the assassins relied upon patience and anonymity. They became beggars on street corners, day laborers who worked in the nearby fields, pilgrims who prowled near churches, or merchants who sold goods in the markets. Positions that made them practically invisible to the powerful they watched. The social hierarchy of the Middle Ages favored them greatly. The rich and powerful rarely noticed those below them. The information collected through observation proved invaluable. How many guards accompanied their target? Did their routes often vary? Who had access to their food and also drink? Were there predictable moments when they were alone or vulnerable? Was the target especially tired or relaxed? Did they accept gifts or food from total strangers? Each detail determined their approach. The most dangerous part of this phase was loneliness. Unlike modern operations, with teams and plans, medieval assassins worked alone. There was no support team watching afar, no rescue if captured. Any mistake during this phase could reveal everything. Being seen observing too closely or asking many questions about the target or appearing too often in the same place could raise suspicions. As the plan took shape, so did a method. A sword was reliable, but required close contact. Poison offered distance, but needed access to their food. A crossbow arrow could reach the target afar, but made escape difficult. The choice depended not only on effectiveness, but also on chances of surviving afterwards, though that consideration often seemed secondary to their employers. Weapons and tools were gathered with discretion. Poisons were prepared using plants or minerals. Knives were sharpened and hidden in canes, covered with layers. Disguises were carefully perfected. Escape routes were carefully plotted. Potential obstacles got identified. All this without attracting any attention. All this without any help. As the day approached, the assassins found themselves alone with their fears and thoughts. Success would bring them no glory, only the hope of survival. Failure meant not only death, but often torture first. The psychological weight of this reality tested the effectiveness of their preparation. Those who doubted did not survive a second mission. Those who succeeded often wished they had not. With the plan taking shape, the medieval assassin entered what was perhaps the toughest phase of the mission: the infiltration and agonizing wait for the perfect moment. This is where many failed, not from lack of skill, but from the psychological tension of maintaining the deception. Disguise was the assassin's most powerful weapon, more valuable than any poison. Unlike modern fiction with elaborate costumes and facial prosthetics, Medieval disguises were based on social invisibility. The most effective disguise was not to completely change one's appearance, but to assume a role that others would overlook. Servants moved through noble houses unseen, unnoticed. Monks traveled without raising any suspicion. The beggars sat for days in the same place, watching and listening as passers-by looked away. The assassin could spend weeks adapting to a chosen role before approaching the target. A false identity as a servant required learning manners, the speech patterns, and deference. Posing as a merchant meant understanding the details of the trade well enough to talk about them with conviction. Each role required total immersion. A single slip could give everything away. For those who targeted the nobility, being part of the domestic staff offered the best access. This could mean starting at the lowest levels like stable boy, kitchen worker, or gardener, and gradually moving up to positions closer to the target. Patient assassins could serve for months before acting, gaining trust and access while observing from within. The Roman concept of the trusted slave, who suddenly became lethal, was a recurring nightmare for the powerful throughout the Middle Ages. Religious disguises proved especially effective. In an age of faith, few questioned the motives of friars or pilgrims. Monasteries provided refuge. Nobles welcomed religious figures into their homes, and cities opened their doors to those wearing religious habits. Stories tell that the Hashishin assassins, disguised as monks, managed to get close enough to assassinate even well-protected rulers. For targets that rarely appeared in public, the assassin could pose as someone the target would specifically summon. Healers for the sick, entertainers for the bored, and messengers with important news. The advantage of these disguises was immediate proximity to the target, though they required a convincing performance under intense scrutiny. Once in position, the wait began. Medieval assassination was not based on quick action, but on patient opportunity. Days or weeks could pass before the perfect moment presented itself. A moment when the guards were distracted, when the target was alone, when escape seemed possible. This wait tested the assassin's mental preparation more than any physical challenge. During this time, the assassin could become a familiar figure within the environment. The servant who always took care of a particular garden. The beggar who sat on the same corner every day. The merchant who entertained the target who passed by regularly. Familiarity did not breed contempt, but invisibility. People stopped noticing what they saw daily. For those who used poison, it was essential to be near food or drink. Kitchen workers, cupbearers, or waiters at banquets had unique opportunities, though those positions were often reserved for trusted people. Alternatively, poisoners could contaminate wells, food stores, or even gifts like wines or sweets sent to the target. The psychological burden of waiting cannot be underestimated. Alone among enemies, constantly alert but appearing relaxed, balancing preparation with patience. These contradictions wore the mind down. Sleep was irregular. Each interaction carried the risk of discovery, and the constant anticipation of violence took its toll. Many assassins likely suffered from what we would recognize today as extreme anxiety or combat stress, though in the Middle Ages there was no name for such conditions. As the days turned into weeks, the assassin's determination was tested. Those who succumbed to pressure, those who acted too soon out of impatience or fear, rarely survived to tell their story. Those who were successful maintained their facade until the perfect moment arrived, when opportunity and preparation finally converged. After days or weeks of surveillance, planning, and waiting, the moment finally arrived. The perfect convergence of opportunity and preparation. The vulnerable target, the escape route clear, the witnesses few or distracted. This was the crucial moment toward which all previous efforts had been directed. A moment that would last barely a few seconds, but would define the rest of the assassin's probably short existence. Medieval assassinations were divided into two broad categories: those that aimed to send a message and those intended to remain a mystery. Each one demanded a different approach, different weapons, and varied considerations for the flight. Each one entailed its own risks and rewards. The choice rarely corresponded to the assassin, but was instead dictated by whoever had commissioned the assassination. Public assassinations were theatrical acts designed to terrorize or to send political messages. The target would be shot down during a ceremony, a banquet, or a public appearance, moments in which many would witness their death. The assassination of Conrad of Montferrat in 1292 by the Hashashin assassins took place in a busy market in Tyre. The assassin approached disguised as a monk, struck with precision, and provoked instant chaos. These assassinations were demonstrations of power, warnings to enemies, or demonstrations that no one was safe. The weapons for public assassinations had to be effective at close range and instantly lethal. Daggers were common, in particular the misrored, a narrow blade designed to slide between plates of armor or ribs. Some assassins used poison blades to ensure even a superficial wound would prove fatal. Speed was essential. The target had to die before the guards could intervene. Precision was paramount, hitting vital areas such as the neck, heart, or base of skull. There would not be a second chance. These public assassinations demanded accepting capture as probable. The assassin could have an escape plan, disappear into the crowd, use smoke or fire as distractions, count on accomplices who created distractions, but most understood survival was improbable. That is why religious or ideological indoctrination was important. The assassin needed to believe that his death served a greater purpose. Whether it was a celestial reward or an earthly political change, private assassinations, by contrast, were designed to create confusion and uncertainty. The target would be found dead in his chambers, poisoned during a private meal, or discovered drowned in a bath. The goal was not only to kill, but to hide who was responsible, perhaps even making the death seem natural or accidental. These assassinations had different political ends. Eliminate rivals without creating martyrs. Eliminate obstacles without revealing who benefited. Poison was the preferred method for covert assassinations. Medieval poisons came from natural sources. Belladonna, hemlock, nasturtium, arsenic extracted from minerals. The effects varied greatly, from rapid and painful deaths to gradual illnesses that mimicked natural diseases. Assassins learned to select poisons based on the desired outcome. Immediate death that would cause alarm versus a slow deterioration that would arouse less suspicion. Administering poison required different skills than handling a sword. The assassin might need to infiltrate kitchens, access private cellars, or contaminate personal items like clothing or candles. Patience again became crucial, as did knowledge of the target's habits. Did they have tasters? Did they share meals with other people who could not be harmed? Was their food prepared separately from the rest of the house? Each detail determined the approach. Other covert methods consisted of simulating accidental deaths, weakening the girths of saddles before hunts, manipulating stairs or railings, or creating conditions for drowning. These methods required meticulous planning and mechanical knowledge, but offered the advantage of avoiding suspicion altogether. In an era when accidents were frequent and forensic knowledge limited, this type of death rarely aroused alarm. The moment of the assassination itself was surprisingly undramatic in successful assassinations. A quick stab with a knife, a poison cup passed without ceremony, a target left alone in a compromised environment. Effectiveness did not lie in elaborate combats or dramatic confrontations, but in the sudden application of lethal force without warning. The target had little time to understand what was happening, much less to defend himself. The best assassinations were those in which the target never saw the assassin or realized he was being attacked until it was too late. For those who used bladed weapons, the attack had to be decisive and anatomically precise. Multiple stab wounds indicated panic or lack of skill and reduced chances of escape. The most effective assassin struck only once, targeting specific vulnerabilities such as the throat, kidney, under the arm to reach the heart, or the base of the skull. Such precision demanded a knowledge of human anatomy uncommon in the Middle Ages. This knowledge was transmitted specifically from experienced assassins to their apprentices. If poison was chosen as a method, the moment of administration usually occurred long before death. The assassin could add substance to food or drink and be far away when effects manifested. This created a separation between the act and its consequences, which provided both a practical distance to escape and a psychological distance from the murder itself. Some poisons acted quickly, producing symptoms within minutes. Others took hours or even days, which allowed the assassin to establish alibis or leave area completely. The aftermath of the murder presented its own challenges. A public assassin had to escape through a crowd now prey to panic. The former guards were now alert in a cordoned-off area. The precious seconds after the hit decided everything. Some assassins relied on disguise, blending into the crowd as another shocked witness. Others used speed, with planned escape routes through alleys or sewers. Some employed distraction tactics, fires, false alarms, or accomplices to create disturbances elsewhere. For undercover assassins, the challenge was different, maintaining normal behavior while the death was discovered, showing appropriate shock or grief, and avoiding any suspicious behavior that could link them to the event. This required extraordinary psychological control, especially if the assassin had established relationships with the target or their family during the infiltration. Servants who had poisoned their masters were expected to mourn them. Guards who had facilitated the assassinations could join the search for non-existent intruders. In both cases, blood posed practical problems. Medieval clothing absorbed it, marking the assassin. The cleaning methods of the time could not easily remove bloodstains. Public assassins had to hide bloody weapons and hands during the escape. Undercover assassins had to make sure that blood did not betray their involvement. This partly explains why poison became popular. It eliminated the bloody evidence left by bladed weapons. The psychological impact of killing at point-blank range should not be underestimated. Modern research on the psychology of combat suggests that human beings have an inherent resistance to killing others, especially face-to-face. Medieval assassins were not immune to this human response. The extensive conditioning to which they were subjected was designed in part to overcome this natural hesitation, to make them capable of inflicting death personally and intimately. Some likely dissociated during the act itself, mentally separating themselves from what their bodies were doing. Despite all the planning, training, and preparation, the assassination itself occupied only a few moments in the assassin's trajectory. Brief, brutal, and irreversible. A dividing line between before and after, if there was an after. Many assassins did not survive their missions. Those who did not only carried the memory of the act, but the awareness that they were now a burden to those who had hired them. Successful assassination did not mark the end of danger, but the beginning of a new and possibly more dangerous phase, the escape and its consequences. The sword had struck. The poison had been administered. The target had fallen. But for the medieval assassin, the most dangerous part of the mission had only just begun. Escaping the scene represented a challenge that many would not survive, regardless of how perfectly they had executed the assassination itself. Unlike modern assassins, who have getaway vehicles, support teams, and technology to help them disappear, medieval assassins faced overwhelming odds. The moment a high-value target fell, the entire city could be locked down, the gates closed, the guards mobilized, strangers interrogated, and rewards offered for any information. The entire machinery of medieval justice and revenge was set in motion with the assassin caught in some gear. For those who had carried out public assassinations, the first moments after the hit decided everything. The initial impact of the crowd provided precious seconds to move away from the fallen target before the screams began. Pre-planned routes through narrow alleys, buildings with multiple exits, or sewers could offer temporary hiding. Some assassins reportedly used smoke bombs made with resin and sulfur to create confusion, while others relied on accomplices who created distractions elsewhere. Church sanctuaries offered a desperate option. Medieval law recognized the right of asylum, whereby fugitives could claim protection within the walls of the church. Although this could avoid immediate execution, it often led to permanent exile or final capture when hunger or thirst forced the assassin to leave. Few churches risk their reputation to protect murderers for long, especially those who attacked powerful figures. The waterways offered opportunities for escape in coastal or riverside cities. Pre-prepared boats could carry the assassins away from immediate pursuit. The assassin could disguise himself as a fisherman, merchant, or pilgrim, blending in with the river traffic before the guards organized searches of the boats. Venice, with its network of canals and its access to the sea, was especially difficult for the authorities trying to contain the assassins who were fleeing. For the assassins who had poisoned their targets, the flight took different forms, since death usually occurred hours or days after the administration of the poison. The assassin could simply leave before suspicion arose. However, when investigations began, they faced different challenges. The houses were closed. Everyone who had access to the victim was interrogated. Torture was freely applied to obtain confessions. The tasters who survived were investigated in case they were accomplices. Medieval justice worked on evidentiary criteria that seem worrying today. Mere suspicion could lead to interrogation under torture. Proximity to the victim could be sufficient cause for accusation. Foreigners or those without powerful protectors became convenient scapegoats. In this environment, even assassins who had escaped the scene of the events were often pursued, identified by informants seeking rewards, or betrayed by accomplices under coercion. If captured, the assassins faced execution methods designed specifically to maximize suffering and serve as a public warning. Hanging was considered too pious for assassins. Instead, they could face the wheel, where their limbs were systematically broken before being tied to a cartwheel and displayed. Others were quartered, their bodies torn apart after being partially hanged. Some were boiled alive or subjected to progressive amputations before the final blow. Even those who escaped the immediate area faced a life as persecuted fugitives. Medieval communities were small, outsiders attracted attention, and travelers were interrogated. Descriptions of wanted assassins were spread along trade routes. Merchants, pilgrims, and messengers transmitted news and warnings. The distinctive features of foreigners made them especially vulnerable. An assassin could escape the city and be identified in a town 10 miles away by someone who heard descriptions from travelers. The safest escape usually consisted of completely abandoning the territory and crossing to regions where news arrived slowly or where different political powers offered protection. Assassins who worked for a kingdom could flee to rival kingdoms where their skills could buy protection. Those who killed for religious causes could seek refuge among sympathetic communities. But these trips entailed their own dangers. Roads plagued by bandits, suspicious border guards, and the constant risk of betrayal. Perhaps most dangerous was that successful assassins often found that those who had hired them were unwilling to risk being discovered in the future. Many employers considered assassins disposable assets whose survival represented an unnecessary risk. After carrying out the task entrusted to them, assassins could find themselves pursued not only by the victim's allies, but also by their own former employers. Historical records suggest that many assassins did not meet their death at the hands of the authorities, but were silently eliminated by those who had hired their services. The hygiene, more organized than most, developed systems to protect their members. After missions, the assassins returned to mountainous fortresses controlled by their order, where pursuing armies faced difficult sieges in hostile terrain. This protection came at the price of lifelong service and isolation from the outside world. Even there, the assassins remained prisoners of their organization. Their knowledge made them too dangerous to lead a normal life. This reality, the almost impossibility of escaping and surviving, determined how medieval assassins approached their missions. Many adopted a fatalistic mentality, seeing themselves as dead from the moment they accepted the assignment. This psychological preparation allowed them to act without hesitation from the survival instinct, which paradoxically made them more effective. Those who expected to die feared neither capture nor punishment. For the few who survived multiple missions, life became a series of new identities, constant surveillance, and the certainty that any stranger could be looking for them. They lived as ghosts on the margins of society, unable to establish bonds or take root, always attentive to any sign of recognition or persecution. Their experience made them valuable, but also marked them as dangerous. Few found anything like peace or security in their last years. The story of a medieval assassin rarely ended with a successful escape and comfortable retirement. Most of the time, it concluded on the gallows, under instruments of torture, or with a knife in the darkness wielded by former allies. They were weapons that were used, then discarded. Their final reward was not gold or glory, but an unnamed tomb or public dismemberment as a warning to others who might follow in their footsteps. For the few medieval assassins who survived their mission and managed to escape, the consequences brought not reward, but a series of completely new dangers. After fulfilling their purpose, these assassins discovered the cruel truth of their profession. They had always been expendable tools, discarded once they were no longer useful. The promised payments often never materialized. The gold left in hiding disappeared. The shelters were abandoned or watched. The contacts disappeared. The carefully prepared ships sailed without them. The betrayal was not personal, but practical. An assassin who survived, knew too much, could identify employers, could be captured and tortured. In medieval powers calculation, a living assassin represented an unacceptable loose end. This abandonment was not simply breaking a contract, but a death sentence. Without the promised resources or protection, the assassins found themselves abandoned in hostile territory, persecuted by the authorities and without any possibility of escape. Some were silently eliminated by the same people who hired them, stabbed while they slept, or poisoned in meals intended to celebrate their success. Others were abandoned to the mercy of city guards or the victims' vengeful allies. Those who somehow evaded both their former employers and enemies faced a life of perpetual flight. Medieval society offered few places to hide. The communities were small and close-knit. Outsiders stood out and were watched. An assassin could change appearance, adopt new identities, learn trades, but constant vigilance wore down body and mind. Many succumbed to psychological stress and turned to alcohol or other substances that dulled their awareness and eventually led them to make mistakes and be captured. Some assassins tried to use their knowledge to protect themselves, threatening to expose those who hired them if pursued. This rarely ended well. Medieval powers did not respond to blackmail with submission, but overwhelming force. An assassin foolish enough to make such threats might find that entire families or communities are punished for his actions, as an example of what happened to those who betrayed powerful patrons. For assassins with political motivations, like the hygiene, the consequences differed somewhat. Their organizational structure provided greater protection, but at the cost of total commitment. Successful assassins returned to isolated fortresses where they spent the rest of their days in the service of the cause. Unable to leave the order or establish a life outside it, they gained status within their closed community but remained prisoners of their knowledge and skills, forever separated from the outside world. The psychological after-effects proved as devastating as practical challenges, and many assassins suffered from what we now recognize as post-traumatic stress. Nightmares, hypervigilance, emotional numbness, and intrusive memories haunted those who had killed intimately. Medieval societies had no concept of mental health treatment. These symptoms were considered character weaknesses or, more sinisterly, divine punishment for their actions. Some sought redemption through religion, believing that sufficient penance could save their souls. They became hermits in remote areas, entered monasteries under false identities, or embarked on dangerous pilgrimages. The doctrine of the Church allowed forgiveness even for the most serious sins, but the psychological burden was not so easily relieved. Records tell of former assassins who spent decades in self-imposed suffering, seeking absolution that never felt complete. Others fully embraced their abilities and became mercenaries or bodyguards for new masters. Once the line of murder was crossed, subsequent violence came more easily. These individuals often died violently. Their existence was a brutal cycle of bloodshed until luck or age failed them. Historical accounts of medieval mercenary companies include references to quiet, dead-eyed men who specialized in killing enemy centurions or officers, probably former assassins who had found no other way. The bodies of captured or dead assassins suffered particular indignities. While common criminals could be executed and buried, murderers were quartered and their remains displayed at the city gates or at crossroads as a warning. Some were preserved by rudimentary embalming, which allowed their corpses to serve as a cautionary display for months or years. Others were burned completely and their ashes scattered to prevent a dignified burial. Medieval belief held that such treatment prevented the soul's rest, a fitting punishment for those who had deprived others of their natural life. For the most notorious murderers, death did not bring oblivion, but dark fame. Their names and deeds passed in a folklore, often distorted and exaggerated in each new version. These stories rarely captured the raw reality of the desperation, manipulation, and disposability that defined their actual lives. Instead, they became cautionary tales, or, worse still, romantic figures who inspired others to follow similar paths, perpetuating cycles of violence and exploitation. Perhaps the cruelest consequence was the erasure of their identity. Most murderers died not only physically, but also historically, nameless, without record forgotten. Their employers strove to eliminate any evidence linking them to the murder. Documents were destroyed, witnesses silenced, and records altered. Even when the murder became part of the historical record, the murderer remained anonymous or was attributed a false identity. These men lived and died as shadows. Their existence was only recognized at the moment of violence that defined them. Thus, the story of the medieval murderer does not end with wealth and glory, but with betrayal, abandonment, and oblivion. They were never the romantic heroes of modern fiction, but disposable weapons in games controlled by powers that far surpassed them. Once their brief usefulness was fulfilled, they were discarded without ceremony or consideration. Their only lasting impact is the ripples of political change that they set in motion with their deaths. Changes that they themselves rarely lived to witness, and that they would not have understood even if they had. Time has the ability to transform the darkest truths into the most seductive myths. Nowhere is this more evident than in how we remember medieval murderers today. The ruthless, desperate, and ultimately disposable murderers of history have been reborn in our collective imagination as something completely different. Master warriors with incredible skills, noble motives, and romantic lives. This transformation reveals more about our modern sensibility than it does about historical reality. The very word assassin comes from the Hashishin, that secret sect of Nazarius Meles, whose assassins sowed terror in the hearts of rulers throughout the Middle East during the Crusades. However, even this famous group of medieval assassins has been completely mythologized. Modern entertainment portrays them as an organized brotherhood of philosophical assassins with elaborate training facilities, ritual traditions, and a complex moral code. The historical reality was far more pragmatic. Religious devotees willing to die for their cause, who used simple disguises and direct methods instead of acrobatics or exotic weapons. The medieval chronicles themselves contributed to the creation of this myth. Christian writers embellished the stories of the Hashishin, describing elaborate paradisiacal gardens where recruits were drugged and shown visions of heaven. Muslim accounts emphasize their seemingly supernatural abilities to penetrate heavily guarded fortresses. Both sides exaggerated to explain how these murderers managed to win against all odds. The prosaic truth that social invisibility and simple determination could overcome most security measures seemed insufficient to explain their effectiveness. The Renaissance witnessed the first idealization of the murderer in European literature. Political assassinations were reframed as necessary sacrifices for the common good. The tyrannical were portrayed as heroes instead of murderers. The writings of Machiavelli on the Usefulness of selective assassination for political stability helped transform the image of murderers, who went from being criminals to pragmatic tools of the art of governing. The murderer began his slow evolution from the despised murderer to the necessary shadow warrior. In the 19th century, Gothic literature adopted the murderer as a typical, mysterious, skilled, and exotic character. The Oriental fascination of the time painted murderers as masters of esoteric Oriental arts instead of desperate men with daggers. Thus, Walter Scott's novels starring murderers endowed them with tragic pasts and complex motivations. The disposable tools of medieval power were reinvented as melancholic anti-heroes with their own moral codes. Modern entertainment has completed this transformation. Video games present murderers as protagonists with superhuman abilities, elaborate training systems, and secret societies with resources that rival those of nations. Movies portray them as martial arts masters with access to cutting-edge technology and global support networks. These fictional murderers retire to a quiet life when they finish their work, having accumulated wealth and wisdom throughout their bloody careers. This idealized vision bears almost no resemblance to historical reality. Medieval murderers were not trained from childhood in secret fortresses in the mountains. They were not masters in handling dozens of weapons and fighting styles. They did not have networks of informants, teams of support agents, or complex escape plans. They were not rich, respected, or free to choose targets based on moral considerations. The historical truth is far more somber and human. They were desperate people exploited by power, used for deadly purposes, then discarded. Their training focused more on obedience than excellence. Their methods were direct and simple, not elaborate. Their rewards were scarce, if there were any. Their endings were usually violent and premature. Their legacy was deliberate oblivion, not a legendary status. Why is this transformation important? Because myths shape how we understand power and violence today. The idealized assassin reinforces the idea that skillful violence can solve complex problems, that killing key people can predictably change the course of history. It suggests that practitioners of such violence can remain psychologically whole and morally complex individuals who maintain control over their destiny. Reality tells a different story. Medieval assassinations often produced unintended consequences. Power vacuums were filled by equally problematic successors or martyrs whose deaths reinforced the causes they opposed. The assassins themselves were traumatized, manipulated, and ultimately destroyed by their participation in political violence. Far from being masters of their destiny, they were disposable assets in games played by others. Perhaps most importantly, the mythification of assassins obscures the human cost of political violence. Real assassination was not a clean and skillful art, but a bloody and messy affair that destroyed not only the target, but also the assassin. Historical accounts do not describe elegant warriors in shadows, but broken people who sold their humanity for promises rarely fulfilled, who died painfully and in solitude, and whose names were deliberately forgotten. The few medieval assassins whose names have survived in the historical records, Hassani Sabah, who led the Hashishin, or Balthazar Gerard, who killed William the Silent, are not remembered for their skills or successes, but for the political earthquakes that their actions unleashed. They were pebbles that triggered avalanches, and their personal destinies insignificant compared to the changes they set in motion. Perhaps in this lies the only real parallel between the myth and the reality of the medieval assassin. Both were ultimately defined not by who they were, but by what they did. That single violent moment that connected them briefly but permanently with history. The difference is that our myths grant them an agency, skill, and purpose that their historical counterparts never had. The reality of the medieval assassin remains a sobering counterpoint to our modern fascination with skilled, principled assassins. They were not masters, but victims of their bloody trade. They were not heroes, but tools. They were not legends in their time, but deliberately forgotten footnotes. Their true legacy is not the romantic myth we have created, but the harsh lesson that their lives and deaths offer. That those who wield violence in the name of the powerful rarely escape its consequences. And that those who kill for others often die for them too. Hey guys, tonight we delve into the chaotic, wine-soaked halls of medieval royalty, but not as a king, knight, or nobleman. No, you are the jester, the fool, the one who could mock a monarch to his face and maybe live to see the next dawn. Now movies love to paint jesters as quirky comic relief. Floppy hats, witty rhymes, maybe a solo heist or two. But the truth is, the jester's life was far more brutal. Imagine being a walking escape valve for royal egos. One wrong joke, and what you hear is not laughter. It's the sound of shackles or worse. So, before you settle in, take a second to like and subscribe, but only if you really enjoy the dark corners of history that we explore here. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. I love seeing how far the madness goes. Very well, lights off, volume up. Let's begin tonight's strange journey into the twisted world of the medieval jester. Imagine waking up each morning knowing that your only purpose in life is to be laughed at. Not with you, but at you. Welcome to the strange and often terrifying life of a medieval court jester, where your entire existence revolves around one rule: be funny or die. You're not a person. You're a walking anti-stress toy with bells. The king has had a bad day. You better make him laugh. The queen is bored. Dance, jester. Dance. You exist solely to entertain others, which might seem like the life of modern celebrities, but with a key difference. Failure meant much more than bad reviews. You were chosen for this honor for one of three reasons. Either you were witty and quick with jokes, you were born with some physical oddity that people found funny, or you were simply desperate enough to take the only job available. Congratulations on your career choice. What makes your position truly strange is the contradiction that defines it. You are invisible and, at the same time, constantly watched. When you're not acting, it's like you don't exist. No one asks you how your day went or what you think of politics. But the moment you enter the scene, all eyes follow your movements. All ears sharpen to hear your words, and all minds judge whether you deserve to stay there. The true irony. You exist for everyone's entertainment except your own. Your jokes make others laugh while you calculate whether that laughter has been sincere enough for you to eat tonight. Your ridiculous dances entertain the court while your feet bleed in those absurd pointed shoes. Your witty observations make the nobles feel intelligent while you carefully avoid saying anything that could cost you your head. Welcome to life as medieval entertainment. I hope you enjoy being the human joke. Nothing reveals your true condition in court like feast time. Imagine this. The great hall is full of nobles gorging on roasted meats and fine wines. The air smells of food, sweat, and despair. The latter comes mainly from you. Mealtime is showtime, and you're the only thing in the room less respected than the bones thrown to dogs. While the others sit and eat, you act. You juggle apples between courses. You mock the nobles just enough to make them laugh, but not enough to anger them. You tell obscene jokes that make the king laugh and the queen pretend to be offended. And all this time, you're starving because you don't eat until the entertainment is over, and sometimes not even then. Reading the king's mood becomes your most important skill for survival. Is he in a good mood? Then maybe you can take that joke a bit further. Is he frowning while drinking wine? Then maybe today is not the day to make fun of his new crown. A bad joke means no dinner. A joke too witty, implying that the king is not as intelligent as you may mean a knight in the dungeon. The drunker the nobles are, the more dangerous your job becomes. They laugh louder, but they get angrier faster. If you're lucky, they will throw food at you. Sometimes they throw glasses, knives, or even punches. And you are expected to accept everything with a smile because, well, that is what managers do. Each laugh you provoke feels like throwing a coin. Heads, you get approval and maybe some crumbs from the table. Tails, you get humiliation or something even worse. And you throw that coin hundreds of times a day with your stomach rumbling and your dignity dwindling. The banquet ends. The nobles stagger to bed with full stomachs. And you pick up the food from your disguise and wonder if tomorrow's performance will be your last. They call it freedom of expression. The great privilege of a court jester. While everyone else had to measure their words carefully in the presence of royalty, you, supposedly, could speak truth to power. What they forgot to mention was the fine print. Freedom of expression until suddenly, violently, it stopped being so. Imagine this twisted agreement. The king sits on his throne, surrounded by nobles who nod at his every word. They are powerful people who own land, lead armies, and control wealth. However, none of them dares tell the king that his new tax plan is crushing the peasants or that his military strategy is doomed. That dangerous task falls to you, the jester in your colorful suit. Your supposed freedom to tell the truth makes you as valuable as completely expendable. One day you could save the kingdom by making the king laugh at his own absurd idea until he abandons it. The next day, you could find yourself chained for having chosen the wrong moment. To be honest, your value lies in that narrow margin between useful information and punishable offense. The cruelest thing is that you become a political tool. The king uses you to probe dangerous ground. He allows you to mock a visiting diplomat to see how he reacts under pressure. He encourages you to joke about a noble he suspects of treason, watching his face for signs of guilt. You utter the insults that the king cannot say, becoming his verbal assassin. Then comes the inevitable betrayal. When the joke goes too far, when the insulted party demands that someone pay for the disrespect, guess who becomes the convenient scapegoat? It is not the king who nodded and winked at you to make the joke. It is not the courtiers who laughed along with you. Only you, the disposable fool who supposedly acts alone. You are not a man of power. You are a human shield with meshes. Your jingle bells jingle as you dance on the razor's edge between cunning and death. Your words may seem free, but they are the most valuable thing you have, and one day you will pay for them with more than you can afford. This strange power dynamic has historical roots that go back centuries. In medieval Europe, speaking out against the king was treason, punishable by death. However, somehow, the jester emerged as the sole exception. Kings like Henry VIII of England kept jesters like Will Sommers, who could criticize royal decisions when no one else dared. The French court maintained the tradition of jesters, who served as a mirror to the king, reflecting truths that would otherwise remain hidden. But this freedom came with invisible chains. Let us consider the case of Archbold Armstrong, jester to King James I of England. Armstrong enjoyed a protected status for years, mockingly calling powerful religious figures toads and vipers. His sharp tongue earned him enemies among the nobility. However, the king's favor kept him safe until suddenly it stopped. After one too many insults against Archbishop Laud, Armstrong was stripped of his position and expelled from court. His freedom of expression disappeared the moment he posed a real threat to the power structure. The truth is that your license to gesticulate is merely theater, an appearance of honesty within a dishonest world. The king allows you to speak freely not because he values truth, but because it suits him. Your criticisms make him seem fair and open to subjects. Your jokes at the expense of his enemies weaken their position without him lifting a finger. Think about the suit you wear, the motley clothes, the ridiculous hat, the bells announcing your presence. This outfit is not just for show. It distinguishes you from normal society. It indicates to everyone that your words come from outside the usual norms. The suit tells the world, do not take this person seriously. He is nothing more than a fool. After all, this visual reminder of your otherness has a key purpose. It means that when you speak uncomfortable truths, people can laugh. The king can listen to your criticisms about his greedy tax collectors and do nothing, because the criticisms come wrapped in a joke from a man in a ridiculous hat. Your truth becomes deniable the moment it leaves your mouth. And what happens on those rare occasions when your words actually change something? When the king follows your advice, disguised as humor, you never get credit. The king becomes wise for listening to advisors. The nobles praise his judgment. Meanwhile, you take a back seat, the invisible architect of change, until you are needed to entertain. Your position as bearer of truth carries another death trap. You must somehow know what truths are acceptable and which will lead to perdition. The politics of court move in mysterious ways, with alliances changing overnight and yesterday's favorites becoming enemies. You must navigate these treacherous waters with only your wit to guide you. Say something inappropriate about the queen's family, and you could insult a potential ally. Mock the wrong noble, and you could become the target of someone the king secretly respects. If you joke too soon about a military defeat, you could reopen wounds not yet healed. There is no manual for the job. There are no clear limits. You learn by surviving one day after another. Some jesters thrived in this impossible position. Triblet, the jester who deceived King Francis I of France, once slapped the king's butt. When the king threatened to execute him for this insult, Triblet supposedly replied that he deserved clemency for mistaking the king for the queen. The king, amused by this even greater insult, commuted the penalty to banishment. Not all jesters were so lucky or intelligent. The real tragedy is that the more effective you are at telling truth to power, the more dangerous your position. The truly insightful jester creates powerful enemies simply by doing their job well. Those who tell comfortable falsehoods can survive longer than those who tell uncomfortable truth. And so, the system corrupts even the only role that supposedly exists outside its influence. You're not a man of power. You're a human shield in tights. Your bells jingle as you dance on the razor's edge between cunning and death. Your words may seem free, but they're the most expensive thing you own. And one day you will pay for them with more than you afford. All this talk about telling truth to power may sound noble. You might even start thinking of jesters as some kind of medieval heroes of free expression. It's time to face reality. Death was always just a bad joke away. The history books rarely focus on the jesters who suddenly vanished from the court records. Those who joked during dinner and were never seen again. Those who went too far and discovered just how far their supposed immunity went. But these missing jesters were as much a part of court life as those famous ones who lived to old age. Let's take the case of Klausner, a jester in the Saxon court in the early 16th century. As the story goes, when he mocked a powerful noble yet again, he was thrown into a cell and forgotten. Without trial, without public punishment, he simply disappeared. Or think of Jane Fool, one of the few female jesters who served Catherine Parr, last wife of Henry VIII. When she made a joke alluding to the king's failing health, she was quickly expelled from court and sent to live in utter poverty. Her crime? Telling an uncomfortable truth. Medieval courts were violent places where justice was dispensed swiftly and often lethally. Even for nobles, punishment could be sudden and extreme. For a low-status jester, protections were even fewer. The supposed immunity of the jesters only existed in the mind of the king, and minds can change in an instant. Smart jesters learned to read the atmosphere with uncanny precision. They had to perceive when the king's laughter was genuine and when it was growing anger. They had to detect the flush of anger on a duke's face before it became an order to beat them. It was necessary to feel the change of mood when a political alliance shifted overnight, turning yesterday's acceptable target into today's protected favorite. An especially dangerous moment was the transition between rulers. When a king died and a new one ascended to the throne, the court jester found himself on very shaky ground. The new ruler could keep him as a link to the past, or consider him a reminder of his predecessor and get rid of him accordingly. The jesters who had mocked the new king when he was just a prince often saw their careers end abruptly once power changed hands. Life at court was also physically dangerous for reasons that had nothing to do with royal displeasure. Drunk nobles might decide it was fun to use you for practice with a sword. Visiting dignitaries might be offended by your foreign accent or strange appearance. Rival artists could spread rumors about you to secure their own positions. And all this in an era without police protection, labor rights, or even basic medical care. The physical demands of the job could be deadly. Jesters were often expected to perform acrobatics, juggle dangerous objects, handle trained animals, and even swallow fire. One wrong move could mean breaking your neck in a fall, being attacked by a train bear, or suffering severe burns from a fire trick gone wrong. Unlike modern artists, they had no safety net, no understudy, no insurance policy. Even if they survived the physical risks, the constant pressure took its toll. Jesters lived with crushing anxiety, not knowing if that day's performance would be their last. Many turned to alcohol to calm their nerves or numb the pain of their injuries. Others developed strange tics and manias because of the constant stress. Some documented cases describe jesters who ended up losing the ability to distinguish between their character and their true selves, trapped forever in a role from which they could no longer escape. And in exchange for what? A bed in a drafty castle and food when they pleased the king. Perhaps a small wage that barely covered the cost of maintaining their wardrobe. The occasional gift when you performed especially well. But never security, never respect, never the certainty that the next day you would be safe. Your immunity was imaginary. Your protection existed only in the realm of tradition and royal whim. If the king changed his mood, so too did your fortune. You lived to make others laugh and could die simply because someone important was having a bad day. This precarious existence had a psychological cost that few modern people can imagine. Every moment of the day required calculation and acting. Each joke was a bet with your life. Each day posed the question, will today be the day when my luck runs out? Will this be the joke that kills me? The truly sad thing. Historical records suggest that many jesters died for their art, not in glorious martyrdom for truth, but in a small, forgotten way. Beaten by guards for a misinterpreted joke, exiled to poverty for a moment of poor judgment, executed in silence when they became inconvenient to power. These deaths rarely made the chronicle. These managers disappeared from history as easily as they had from court. You lived for laughter and could die for bad vibe. This was not a career. It was a prolonged death sentence with occasional applause. Under the colorful suit and behind the painted smile lived a person nobody saw. Take off the mottled clothes, wash the makeup off, silence the tinkling bells, and you will find the saddest man in the room. The loneliness of a jester was a special isolation. You existed in a strange limbo between worlds. You were not nobility, but you lived among them. You were not a common servant, but you served. You were allowed to enter the most elitist spaces of the kingdom, but you did not belong anywhere. They listened to you, but they never heard you. Think about what this meant for your daily life. You ate at the king's table, but only after performing to earn it. You slept in the castle, but often in small, cold rooms near servants. You traveled with the royal retinue, but you went in back with luggage. You were both part of the circle and an outsider, privileged but powerless, visible yet invisible. This intermediate existence made it almost impossible to establish normal human relationships. The nobles saw you as entertainment, not a potential friend. The servants often resented your special status or feared associating with someone close to power. Even other artists, such as musicians or actors, kept their distance, aware that the jester followed an especially dangerous path and that romantic relationships were almost non-existent for court jesters. Few fathers wanted their daughters to marry the king's jester. There were few prospects within the castle walls. Some historical records mention jesters who married and had families, but they were rare exceptions. Most lived a life of emotional loneliness, finding brief solace in fleeting relationships, but never stability of a true partner. Then there was the emotional burden of the role itself. The constant pressure to perform crushed your authentic self. You were never allowed a bad day, never to show genuine anger or sadness. Your emotions did not belong to you. They belonged to your audience. If the king wanted to laugh, you laughed even if your heart broke. If the court needed distraction from bad news, you danced even if your own worries consumed you. This performance never stopped. Even in supposedly private moments, you could be called upon to entertain unexpected guests. Even during an illness, you were expected to recover for important occasions. Even during a personal tragedy, your pain took back seat to your professional obligations. You did not have a job. You were the job. The psychological wear of this existence was immense. Historical accounts describe jesters who developed strange habits, such as talking to themselves, having tics, or becoming obsessively superstitious. Others fell into deep melancholy when left alone. The constant contrast between his public persona and private despair was too much to bear. Some accounts mention buffoons who simply disappeared, presumably fleeing their gilded cage in search of freedom, however humble. Perhaps the cruelest aspect was loss of identity. Who were you really beneath the disguise? After years playing the fool, where did performance end and the real person begin? Many managers ended up losing this distinction. The mask merged with his face permanently. The role consumed them until nothing remained of who they once were. Even your talents were distorted by position. If you were witty by nature, that wit became a weapon in court politics. If you had physical gifts, your body became a tool that others could handle. If you had a beautiful voice for singing, it was not for your own expression, but to satisfy the king's desire for entertainment. Everything that made you special became a commodity and was owned by others. The gradual erosion of self manifested in small, daily humiliations. Having to laugh when nobles made fun of your appearance. Being forced to eat leftovers while others feasted. Being called the fool instead of your name. Being disgusted at in the third person while you were right there. Being touched, pushed, or handled without consent, as if you were an object instead of a person. Age brought its own terrors. Unlike skilled artisans, who could practice their craft into old age, buffoons depended on agility, quick wit, and often youthful appearance. What happened when your knees failed after years of acrobatics? When did your voice break? When did your reflexes slow? Few kings kept aging buffoons out of sentimentality. Most were simply replaced by younger, more entertaining models, discarded after years of loyal service. For many, the path of the buffoon ended in poverty and anonymity. After decades living in palaces, you could find yourself on the street with little savings and no practical skills. Your fame would not open doors in the outside world. Your specialized talents had little application outside court. Even your connections brought more danger than advantage, as association with a deposed buffoon could be politically risky. Everyone saw the buffoon. No one saw the person. You made everyone laugh, but you died without anyone listening to you. This was the true tragedy of the court buffoon, living a life so dedicated to acting that even you began to forget there was more to you than the jingle of bells and the easy joke. In the end, you were not even granted the dignity of a dignified death. Historical accounts show that even funerals of court buffoons sometimes became spectacles with comical epitaphs or gestural references. Your entire existence, from the first bow to the last breath, was filtered through the prism of entertainment. Even in death, you are still the punchline of someone else's joke. If you think the medieval buffoon disappeared with the last royal courts, think again. The bells may have gone silent, but the role lives on in different guises. The modern world has simply repackaged court gestures for current consumption. Look around you at the entertainment landscape. Late-night comedians walk a tightrope of political commentary, telling uncomfortable truths, but always with a punchline to soften blow. One joke too many, one misstep in reading the atmosphere, and their career is over overnight. Their immunity is as imaginary as that of any medieval buffoon. Social media personalities build entire brands based on being outrageous, saying what others don't dare, and pushing boundaries to get likes and views. They exist in that same dangerous space between the truth-teller and the buffoon, between the valued voice and disposable entertainment. When they fall into disgrace, the public forgets them as quickly as any medieval court forgot its deposed jester. Professional comedians face the same paradox that jesters faced centuries ago. We are expected to make us laugh with uncomfortable truths, to mock the powerful, to say the unspeakable. However, they must know exactly where the invisible line is. If they are too cautious, they are boring. If they are too dangerous, they become untouchable. The razor's edge does not dull with time. Even in office environments, there are designated jokers. The person who lightens tense meetings, who dares to tell the boss what others do not dare, who uses humor to blur conflicts. These work with the same tacit understanding. Your ability to make people laugh give you a special privilege until, suddenly, it stops being so. The psychological wear is also similar. How many comedians have talked about depression about the disconnection between their public image and their private reality. How many artists struggle against the pressure of always being at their best, of never having a bad day, of existing mainly for the entertainment of others? The painted smile hides the same pain, whether literal or metaphorical. Digital content creators experience the unique loneliness of being surrounded by an audience, but fundamentally alone. They share intimate details of their lives with millions of people, but they don't really know any of them. They are hyper-visible and completely invisible. The medieval jester would immediately recognize this strange form of isolation. Even physical risks have modern parallels. Specialists, extreme sports stars, and reality show contestants push their bodies to dangerous limits for our entertainment. They risk injury and sometimes death to make us gasp and laugh. When they break or stop being funny, they're often also discarded without much thought for their well-being. The economic system has evolved, but the fundamental agreement has not. The modern artist continues to exchange their dignity for attention, their authenticity for approval, their physical security for economic opportunities. The palace may have become a studio or a social media platform, but the transaction remains the same. Make them laugh or suffer the consequences. Perhaps most disturbing is that we all now participate in this system to a greater or lesser extent. In a world of personal brands and constant performance on social media, we all feel the pressure to entertain. We all know the euphoria of likes and the pain of being ignored. We all understand what it means to create a public image that may have little to do with private reality. The jester's dilemma has been democratized. Act or perish. Be interesting or be invisible. Dance to earn your bread or go hungry. The bells are now notification sounds. The circus has become carefully selected feeds, but the dance remains essentially the same. This is not to say that entertainment is intrinsically exploitative or that making others laugh is something shameful. Joy and humor are vital needs of the human being. The problem arises when entertainment becomes one-sided, when the artist becomes something disposable, when the human being behind the performance completely disappears into his role. What can we learn from the difficult situation of the medieval jester? Perhaps see the person behind the performance. Remember that our comedians, influencers, and artists are first and foremost human beings, not emotional workers who exist solely for our entertainment. Understand that freedom of expression has always had invisible conditions, and that those who seem to speak more freely often pay the highest price. The next time you see a comedian pushing the boundaries, a social media star sharing seemingly private moments, or a colleague using humor to tell uncomfortable truths, remember the painted smile that hides a real pain. Remember the thin line that separates valuable spokespersons for the truth from disposable fools. Remember that behind every performance, there is a person looking for the same thing as all of us.